bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
All right. Well. How you doing? Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah, man. Today is Tuesday, January 31st. 31 days into the new year, just 334 days left, and I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States, hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? Yeah, man. Tonight, this is our 600th show. And tonight, we have Mark McCandlish and the ARV, the Alien Reproduction Vehicle, and other short stories that you might enjoy. Tomorrow night, Whitley Strieber is here. Thursday is another Fader night with John Rappaport. We've got a very special night lined up, by the way, on Thursday. The call-in number is 323-825-5045. We will be taking your calls tonight with Mark McCandlish. He's got a great story. Oh, man, what an experience. What a life. We're going to go through it all tonight with Mark McCandlish. Mark, by the way, I'm just going to tell you right now, is one of the most accomplished aviation artistes in the world. And he so graciously last year, because he, knows what a aviation enthusiast I am, sent us a collection of his prints, and they were all signed. And I'm going to tell you, when and he sent, he stopped it. Oh, it was just incredible. I'm getting choked up thinking about it, and and I'm unrolling these and looking, and they're all signed, and the artwork is breathtaking. And this is artwork that I grew up with, seeing it on the covers of magazines and becoming a friend and absorbing his knowledge and his life's experiences is such an honor. And so tonight we have back with us Mark McCandlish. And so we're going to open up the phone lines, and just an incredible life. Okay, so that's what we're doing tonight. Again, tomorrow night, Whitley Strieber is here. Thursday night, another Fader night with John Rappaport. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. That's what you want to do. Facebook, YouTube. As you know, everything is interactive here. So I've got the chat rooms open on my right. I've got Twitter on my left. An email at my... that would be northeast. So everything is live. Everything is interactive in front of me. Okay, so jump into the chat rooms. Participate in Twitter. Hashtag F2B is the sandbox. Hashtag F2B is questions or comments that happen live during the show. Everything is interactive. If you want to email throughout the show tonight, as in any other night, Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. I got an email today. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it was long, but I actually got an email that was deleted, and it said this: Jimmy, I subscribed to your YouTube channel. I was listening to one of your shows, and I found out that you drink coffee. Do you know? It just went on and on and on and on and on about how bad of a person I am because I drink coffee, right? And what coffee? And I was like, what are you doing? Writing me a page and a half of stuff, right? Which I skimmed over. And then at the end of the email, it said, that's it. I can't listen to you anymore. I have unsubscribed. I was like, what? Oh, man. Now I can appreciate the fact that, you stand up for something. Okay, I appreciate that. But sending me an email like that, hey, I'm not going to stop drinking coffee, number one. That is never going to happen in my lifetime, number one. And number two, you're not going to change the world, and I'm certainly not going to help you do that when it comes to coffee. You change nothing, and and that's it. So that went into the spam folder, so I won't even be able to get another email from this person. Unbelievable. I unsubscribed. Yeah. Okay. All right. Because I drink coffee. But by the way, subscribe to the podcast. We have 600 archive shows, custom apps, Apple, Android, Kindle. Just go to the Google Store or iTunes and download the custom apps. They are amazing, and everything is there. But it's just $2 a month. That's it for 600 archive shows. It's the best deal anywhere. We would do it for free if we could. We just can't. All right? $2 is as low as we can go. But, it's next to free, right? But it does help support the show. We've got so many people that subscribe to the podcast, and it does help, keep this show running. All right? So go and subscribe. 600 archive shows. It's updated every single day. So when you get up and go to work and you jump in the car, you take out your phone, you pop it in, USB that baby, fade to black right there as you're stuck in traffic. It's the only way to go through life, right? I think so. Do support us through all of our sponsors. Please click on their banners over at jimmychurchradio.com. Just go use the promo codes for discounts and free shipping on everything because you are a fade or not. All the promo codes are there in the banners. Go and do it. That's how we do it. This is the American way. This show is supported by our sponsors. That's why it's free. Everything is free. Isn't that cool? Everything that we do, right? Okay. All right. Contact in the Desert is coming up May 19th through the 22nd in Joshua Tree, California. Tickets and info over at jimmychurchradio.com. Next week, our first big conference of the season is the Conscious Life Expo. It's February 10th through the 13th at the LAX Hilton right here in Los Angeles, California. And I'm so excited looking at everybody that is posting that are coming out for the Conscious Life Expo. I got to tell you, that bar is pretty big at the Hilton, and I have the sneaky suspicion it is going to be packed, jammed, full of fader knots. I'm going to be there. Rita's going to be there. Come and hang out. I can guarantee you, standing to my right will be Mike Barra. Standing to my left will be Rita. We will be at the table that glows. That's all you need to know. Just walk in, look for the glowing table, and look for the reflection off of Mike Barra's face, and we'll be standing right there. Okay, so come in and hang out with all of us. All right, let's get the show cracking. Happy birthday to today, Justin Timberlake. That's right, I said it. Is 36 years old. That dude is talented. Just watched a concert with a big band the other night of Justin's. He's one talented dude. Can act, too, as well. If you've never seen, oh, man, I just brain freezed. Southern California, Southland Tales. There you go, Justin Timberlake. Johnny Rotten, a.k.a. Johnny Lydon. Or is it the opposite? Today is 61. And Rita and I were here in the bunker right before the show tonight listening to Sex Pistols. And I got to go. Let's do this right now. Johnny Rotten's birthday is today. What is your favorite Sex Pistols song? Who's gonna figure out mine right now? Who's going to figure out mine? All right, I'll let it slip. Holidays in the Sun. Happy birthday, Johnny Rotten. Our dead guy's birthday today is the one and only Jeff Hanneman. 1964 to 2013, died at the age of 49, lead guitarist and founding member of Slayer, who wrote what is perhaps the best-known thrash metal song of all time, Angel of Death. Slayer got started, by the way, when Hanneman and bandmate Kerry King, I think they kind of worked together. They were phone sales or something, and found out that they both liked Judas Priest, and they ended up forming Slayer. But then, tragically, in 2011, Hanneman contracted necrotizing fasciitis, the flesh-eating disease. Man. And that was it. He ended up dying of liver failure on May 2nd, 2013, 2 years later, right here in Southern California, near his home in the hospital. Happy birthday. Happy birthday, man. I want to say this about Jeff. His playing just revolutionized everything, right? And it didn't matter what kind of guitar player you were, what style of music, but Slayer was a correct band. They wrote the songs, they were correct. And Jeff was much respected by every guitar player out there. And I just have to say that, and I really mean it. Happy birthday, Jeff Hanneman. On this day in history, 1606, at Westminster, London, Guy Fawkes, the chief conspirator in the plot to blow up the British Parliament building, jumps to his death moments before his execution for treason was about to happen. There you go. Guy Fawkes, 1606. Fader fact. Now, this is pretty good. Oh, you guys are the best, man. Look at got the Slayer happening in Twitter. You guys are cool. That's what's so great about this show. Check this out. And Joshua Tree's coming up, right? Contacting the desert. So listen to this. This is a fact. 1,749 out of 1,750 species of cacti, are native only to the Americas. I didn't know that. I thought there were cactus in the Sahara. I just did. I guess not. And that is a Fader fact. Tonight we got Mark McCandlish here and the ARV story. Tomorrow night, Whitley Strieber. And then Thursday night is another Fader night with John Rappaport. Tonight we're taking your calls with Mark, 323-825-5045. We'll open up the phones in a little bit. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Tonight, the one and only Mark McCandlish. We're going to talk about the ARV, his life, and it's an incredible story. All of that's going to follow right after this short break. Tomorrow night, Whitley Strieber is here. Thursday night, another Fader night with John Rappaport. We're going to be taking your phone calls a little bit later with Mark McCandlish, 323-825-5045. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. I'll be right back after this short break with Mark McCandlish. Stay right there.
Hello.
You're listening to Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
Fade to Black will now pause for alien identification.
The station that talks the net. KGRA Radio. When you take the beans from Central America with dashes of Indonesian and African mixed in and then roast it to the dark side of Fade to Black, you create the ultimate brew of fringe. Introducing the Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Yes, River Moon's darkest customized roast was created for the love of Fade to Black. The alchemy of masterful roasting and smoking the beans is in every sip of this full-bodied, dark Java. I need my coffee dark, deep, with distinct bittersweet chocolate highlights, just like the bunker. Leaning further into the darkness of the roast is Fade to Black Blend from River Moon Coffee. Just click on the banner at jimmychurchradio.com and use the promo code F2BBLEND for 15% off of your order today. Go Beckley Teppy.
Hi, folks. In a world of GMO, genetically modified organisms, that is, chemicals, processed foods, and a healthcare system that's unraveling like a cheap suit, it's time to prepare. God created herbs, and herbs help man. Our body can heal itself, just sometimes we need assistance. You need some help? GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. Our mild detox is quite powerful with its unique blend of 8 different herbs. And if you're looking for more, our non-GMO supplements will help you with different needs you might have. Health should be a top priority. Take care of your health naturally. Log on to GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. Give your body a treat. Let the herbs do their thing naturally. Read all the testimonies on the website, GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. Sickness and viruses are like intruders, and herbs are like warriors. Let the tea work for you. That's GetTheTea.com.
9 out of 10 geneticists agree.
Fade to Black is not your father's radio show on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, The Planet.
Hi, this is Chase Klutsky with Fate Magazine Radio, and you're listening to Jimmy Church and Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA digital broadcast station, where the Fader-Knots rock.
Hi, this is Rob Reiner from Anvil, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? I'm Chris. What up? This is Kyle Massey, and you're listening to Jimmy Church Radio.
All right, welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Our guest tonight, Mark McCandlish. Of course, his website is markmccandlish.com. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com. The link is right there. Just click on it. Very simple. Mark McCandlish is an internationally recognized artist who has specialized in aviation and conceptual art within the defense and aerospace industries for the better part of the last 30 years, serving the needs of many of the top American corporations in this regard. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about zero-point energy, the power source behind the secret space program, and trump card of the breakaway civilization, how the back engineering of off-world technology created powerful leverage for corporations to take over control of world government, establish an internationally manned secret space program, and breakaway civilization. We'll cover the revelations as to how remarkable breakthrough technology may have been back-engineered from recovered or captured off-world vehicles, enabled aerospace and defense-related corporations to hijack control of governments worldwide, create a special access-only secret space program, and develop a breakaway civilization with its own goals and agenda. Of course, his website, again, is markmccandlish.com, and I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black the one and only Mark McCandlish. Mark, good evening.
Hi, Jimmy. Jesus, great to be back with you, and delighted to be here, and congratulations on your 600th show.
And it's you, man. It's you, and it's an honor. So there you go.
Thank you.
Now, I've got so many questions for you, and going through your life story, which is a remarkable one, and I hope that by me saying that, I don't embarrass you in any way, but it's an impressive experience or experiences that have managed to come your way. So we're going to share all of that tonight. But before we get there, it's been a year. I can't even believe it. It's been a year since you've been on Fade to Black. And what have you been doing for the last year?
Well, I spent months trying to figure out what was wrong with my car after I did a complete rebuild of the engine. It turned out that had a short in the starter system, and it blew out the starter switch, and it took me months to figure it out, but eventually, after teasing the entire wire harness apart, I finally figured it out. It's like working on the airplanes that I worked on when I was in the Air Force.
Right.
Anyhow, but just by coincidence, in the last few months, I've made contact with a number of people who have actually developed some devices. There's a young man that lives up in the area of Big Bear Lake in Southern California who's developed I'm not exactly sure what you would call it, but it's kind of like a kinetic lifting device. It uses a number of rotating elements that spin at high speed, and they're able to essentially throw the weight that is contained within the system in a particular direction. And if that happens to be upward, this device, which apparently weighs only a few hundred pounds, is able to lift tons of weight. And in fact, it was so effective that the last time he operated this thing, it actually started to overheat, and a component on the device melted, so he's had to rebuild it. But I hope to get some kind of development program started to help this young fellow. And there's some other people that I've been contacted by who have some information on free energy devices that claim that they've built things that work. And I know that there are a lot of people that are interested in that kind of thing. Whether or not they have specifically anything to do with zero-point energy, I'm not sure at this point. But,
right.
And I've also made contact with a number of people who have had some peripheral contact within the secret space program, and I've learned some new details about certain things going on with different aerospace companies. So that's kind of interesting. I'll have a chance to talk about that as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to get back to this kinetic device. Are you suggesting that it's able to output more energy than is input?
Well, I don't know that that's true, because it uses a basic power source like an electric drill or a vacuum cleaner or anything, but it has spinning elements. Think of them as like centrifugal weights,
right,
that allow you to control when the weight is thrown out to the farthest reaches of the diameter of this thing. So in a way, it's actually throwing its weight and then pulling it back towards the center at just the right moment, but it's timed in such a way that every time the elements make this rotational cycle, the main mass of the device is thrown in the same direction and then pulled back each time. And I'd like to tell you more about it, but I don't want to disclose too much because the device hasn't been patented yet.
Right.
But the really interesting aspect of the story is that the young man, after he developed the first prototype and it actually worked, he was sort of poking through some of the UFO and crop circle websites, and he actually found crop circles that seemed to be almost exact duplicates of what his blueprints look like, which I thought was utterly fantastic if you think about it.
And coincidence.
It wasn't something that he had seen ahead of time,
right.
But after he recognized what it took to actually build the components of this device, and he would just happen to come across some of these aerial photographs of crop circles, he found that there were components in the machine that he had developed on his own. And most of this came to him through sort of inspirational dreams, I guess you would say.
Right.
And a lot of this material that he developed actually finds representation in some of these crop circles, and I just find it utterly fascinating.
Yeah, totally. That's exciting news.
Well, it is. I mean, think about the applications. If you had a device like this, it could throw its mass and sustain tons of lifting pressure within a fixed environment. That means that you could take an aircraft like the B-2 bomber and give it the opportunity to loiter with its engines in idle over a fixed point in space and time, almost indefinitely,
right,
as long as you had enough power coming off the APUs on your engines to keep the electrical power source for this device working. It would basically hold it in the air, like hovering, almost like anti-gravity, but without any kind of electrical fields and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I've got way too many questions that are just going to disclose stuff that you can't talk about. So before I hear you say 15 times, yeah, Jimmy, but I can't talk about it, we'll let this go for now until this moves along, and we'll get him and you back on the show at some point. And when he's ready to disclose,
he would enjoy that very much because he's looking for funding too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very exciting stuff. Okay, well let's start here. Your talent as an artist, and as you know, I was an artist. I don't dabble in it anymore. But when one artist sees another artist work and starts to appreciate it and looks at it, one artist will normally go, "Man, I wonder how he can do this," or she. This is incredible, and we appreciate other art. And when I look at your artwork, I cannot put it together how you have that talent, but you do. It's a world-class talent. How did this fascination with aviation come into play for you? Did it happen when you were very young?
Well, kind of in a way. I mean, you're going to laugh because my greatest fascination when I was a kid, my dad was a 25-year veteran of the Air Force. He started out in the Navy and then made an interbranch transfer to the Air Force. And he started out his Air Force career at Williams Air Force Base near Chandler, Arizona, which is southeast of Phoenix, I believe. But I had just an absolute fascination with dinosaurs and monsters and things like this, and so I was trying desperately to draw these things because I just wasn't happy with the photographs that I was finding of other artists' work in the encyclopedias that we had in the house. And Arizona, if you're familiar with the state at all, practically the whole northern half of that state is just one giant fossil bed. It's incredible. And so I used to go up there on our camping trips on the weekend, and I'd come home with about 50 pounds of rocks, and trying to draw all of these things and studying paleontology. And so that sort of spawned an interest in the different sciences. And, of course, every time there was an open house or an armed forces day being celebrated at one of the bases where my dad was stationed, I got a chance to go out on the flight line and see all of these incredible aircraft. And back in the 60s, of course, was the era of planes like the F-104 Starfighter and the F-100 and things like that, and the beginnings of the F-4 Phantom and the planes that were eventually deployed and used in Vietnam. And so that was how I became familiar with aviation and the power and the design, the beauty of the designs that these aircraft represent. It wasn't something that I wasn't drawn to it because of the destructive forces behind the aircraft, but because of the natural shapes and blendings, the sculptured but natural appearance of the aircraft that allow them to perform and do the things that they're able to do. And that's really what drew me to aviation.
Well, out of what's your favorite plane? I'm just going to let you know now. Mine was the F-104. And
really?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, when I was a kid, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but when I was a kid, probably 1972, you used to be able to buy die-cast, very small, I don't know what the scale was, like Matchbox versions of airplanes. Oh, yeah. And I can't remember the company that made them. But anyway, the F-104, I mean, you looked at that, and there was, for me, it was like magic. And I finally got to see one up at the Boeing Museum up in Seattle. And I was shocked as to how tiny that airplane was.
It's remarkable.
Yeah, tiny. Like, I looked down on it. And it was like, wow, this is, it's very.
Today, it's almost like a kid airplane. It's so small compared to the other planes that are out there.
Yeah, what do you think the wingspan is? What do you think the wingspan is on that?
Oh, God, probably not much more than 20 feet.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It's really narrow. I mean, the thing that fascinated me about the F-104, I remember going up to these planes at the air shows, and they'd have this rubber guard along the leading edge of the wing, and I would say, well, why do you have rubber on the wing like that? And the pilot would come over and say, well, because if I took that rubber off there, you could cut your fingers on the edge of that wing. It's so sharp.
Right.
And I thought, man, that is what you would call a supercritical wing, one that has such a finely tuned edge to it that any little dent or ding can affect the performance of the entire aircraft.
Yeah, it shouldn't have flown,
It's like a bumblebee in some ways.
Yeah, it just in a straight line, there was no tricks going to be performed in that. But what a great looking plane. So what's your favorite? What's your favorite?
Well, for me, it's a toss-up. If I was going to look back to the World War II era, I'd have to say the P-51D Mustang was my favorite. And but the modern-day equivalent, I would say, is the F-16. I remember when I was in the Air Force, the first couple of prototypes actually stopped at McCord Air Force Base, where I was stationed with the 318th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, working on F-106s, another area-ruled fuselage like the F-104, by the way. And this plane, the first time I ever saw the F-16 with the cockpit sitting way up on this pedestal out in front of this huge intake that was underneath, I mean, it really looked like something out of a science fiction movie. We were just absolutely fascinated on the ramp when we saw that thing rolling in.
Yeah, I did the same thing with the F-16 down in Panama. We would sit outside of Howard Air Force Base and watch the F-14s and F-15s come in, and take off, which was cool, loud, But we would sit and wait forever for an F-16, which totally had a different sound and a different look, much smaller too, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
But
well, do you remember the sound of the F-104 Starfighter? I mean, this
I never
plane,
saw one fly.
Oh God, I'm telling you, they had a lot of them at Ramstein when my dad was there in the early '60s, and we would sit off the end of the runway and watch these things come into land. And I swear to you, Jimmy, they sound like a huge wolf howling as they come in. There's just this kind of howling, droning sound. It's spooky, but just really cool too.
Yeah, I could talk planes all day long. It's one of my favorite things out there. And if I was going to go back to World War II, I'm going with the P-38. Yeah, there's
definitely a cool plane.
Again, right here, Burbank, Lockheed. That's where they did their thing. But the P-38. Again, I don't know why. It's just something that I was always the lines of the craft. It was something that I was always attracted to. So the P-38 for me.
Another Lockheed product.
Yep, Lockheed. So, how did you get into the crazy world of industrial illustrations and working for companies doing exactly what you love, which is draw aircraft?
Well, see, I never had any idea that there was a kind of artwork like what I do now. In fact, I remember the art instructor of my high school told me, he's Mark, there's no future in being an artist, He honestly said this to me. And so I was discouraged for a lot of years, and then I was working at the Milton Bradley Toy Company in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, loading boxcars over the summertime. They're sending all their Christmas supplies out, and I met this designer who worked for the company who told me about a college in Pasadena, California called the Art Center College of Design. And this was where all of the big three car auto manufacturers were getting their designers. And I said, well, how do you go to the school? Where is it? What do you do? How do what this kind of thing? And so he explained to me, how you would go about putting together a portfolio to be accepted at this college. And, of course, there were a lot of other things that you needed to know, like, the mechanical end of working on cars, which was something I kind of had under my belt as a kid anyway. I was a car nut, like a lot of young men my age. And but then I realized that the tuition was so high, and this in the late 70s was like $1,200 per semester. And, $2 an hour minimum wage, there was no way I could afford to go to that school. So I decided to go into the Air Force for 4 years and get the GI Bill behind me. And thankfully, in a way, it turned out I was kind of lucky because the aircraft that I decided to take on as my skill was the F-106, which was the MA-1 and ASQ-25 weapons control system. So I was working in electronics. I had some pretty high aptitude scores with the Air Force when they evaluated me, and so that's where they put me. But about 18 months into my enlistment, there was a directive that came down from the Department of Defense saying that they had overmanned the career field in my particular area by over 200%. And so we were swarming over the aircraft when they came back with mechanical problems, fixing them, and then we all sat around playing cards for hours. And so they decided that they needed to reassigned their manpower in other areas, and they gave me the opportunity to cross-train onto other planes, which sounded exciting. But if they were going to invest that kind of time in my training, they wanted me to extend to a 6-year enlistment. And I said, well, it's not part of my plan. And so they said, well, then we'll be able to give you an early out with all benefits if you have over 18 months' time in service. So I said, well, how much time do I have now? And I was about 30 days shy of 18 months' time in service at that point. So I said, well, can I delay my decision for about 35 days? And they said that I could. So I decided that I was going to take an early out, and I got the GI Bill behind me. So it put me about 2.5 years ahead of schedule, according to my original plan, which was great. And so I went to Art Center. I spent a little time working in the automotive design curriculum, and then began to discover, much to my chagrin, that because of the swarm of Japanese imports that was coming into the United States in the late 70s, early 80s, that there was a major crash in the automotive industry. They were not selling as many cars. They were not hiring as many designers. And so it didn't look like there would be any employment opportunities for me once I got out. And so that's when I switched over to a straight design, illustration, and curriculum. From there, I found a job that was available as a matte artist, working for a special effects company that produced a couple of movies that kind of obscure now. I think one was called Megaforce with Barry Bostwick, The Incredible Shrinking Woman with Lily Tomlin, and then there was Outland with Sean Connery. And all of the special effects for those movies were done by the company that I was brought on board with as a matte artist, and became an apprentice. And right before my paperwork for the Matte Painters Union came through, I lost my sponsorship because I simply couldn't afford to work any longer without being paid, which is kind of what they expect you to do in the movie industry when you're an apprentice.
Right.
You basically work for free. And I had pretty much gotten to the end of my financial limits, and so literally the day before my membership application from the Matte Painters Union came in the mail, I quit. So I was stuck high and dry with no place to go, and so I went to a headhunting agency in Los Angeles. They found me a job at General Dynamics in Pomona, California, where I went to work as a conceptual artist and spent the first 6 months doing paste up and amber lith and ruby lith and this kind of thing. And I finally said, well, look, this isn't why you guys hired me. I'm not doing artwork here. I'm just doing paste up. This isn't why I came to work for you guys. So they decided to shut me up. What they would do is they would give me the assignment of doing a cutaway illustration of the Divisional Air Defense tank system, which was a big anti-aircraft gun using 35 millimeter Bofors, they were Oerlikon cannons, recoilless cannons that were from a German company on this turret that was designed to search, track, and to shoot down flying aircraft at distances out to something greater than 4 kilometers, which is pretty fanatical.
It's
fantastic. I mean, it's like leading in skeet shooting. You have to shoot ahead of where you anticipate the target will be, so the bullets arrive on time. But I, being a car guy, this was probably the most fun thing they could have assigned me to do, and so the illustration came out very well. You can actually see a copy of it on my Facebook page under the photos section. And it was a cutaway that showed all the components in the turret, how the magazines work, the controls. And in fact, the funny thing about it was they had the company Activision come in and design all of the controls and the interfaces for the gunners that would be in this tank turret, so that as young kids were recruited and brought in the Army, they'd be able to relate to the gun system like it was a video game. But that was how they put the system together, and so from that point on, the head illustrator at that division, which was I think it was the Naval Sea Systems Division of General Dynamics in Pomona, they made me the right-hand man of their chief illustrator, and so I went on to do a lot of work there and design work, and they had a number of upgrades for an anti-missile. It was a ship defense system called the Phalanx gun system. It was basically like a Gatling gun with a radar-slaved system that would point the gun and take out missiles before they got close enough to harm the ships. In fact, this was a system that was not activated on the USS Stark in the Persian Gulf when it got hit by that Iraqi missile years ago.
Right.
But if it had been turned on, it would have been 100% successful in blocking that missile from coming in and hitting the ship. And so I developed an advanced system for that gun system, that instead of having a magazine right on the gun itself, that would limit your ability to reload, especially if you're on in a storm and high seas, bad weather, this kind of thing, or the middle of a firefight. This thing would load from below decks, and it would even reload the individual rounds so that you could constantly have a replenished supply ready and waiting if you got into an intensive battle and you had to defend yourself from all sides. And so I sent all these plans off after they sent me up to General Electric's Gatling gun facility up in, I think it was Vermont somewhere. And then weeks later, an engineer comes down with complete blueprints of my entire plan that I'd submitted, and he took full credit for everything. So at that point, I thought it was pretty much time to leave General Dynamics, and that's when I began freelancing throughout the defense industry.
I'm just looking at the General Dynamics cutaway, and I got to tell you, that's, as far as a guy thing goes, it don't get any cooler than that. I mean, seriously.
Oh, I know. I mean, I got to climb all over that tank and had complete access to the photo archives that showed all of the internal components, and then putting them all together in a way that made the skin of the tank look like it was pretty much like made of glass. Was just I had so much fun. I can't even tell you.
I want everybody to take the time to go to Mark McCandlish's Facebook page and go to his photo section and just scroll through his album of his artwork and look at, Discover Magazine and Popular Mechanics and oh man, I'm looking at this. My favorite of yours, we were talking about earlier today, the F-16 is just absolutely incredible. The artwork is insane. I want to go back.
Thank you.
Before we hit this break, we've got 2 minutes here. While you were in the Air Force, did you see anything strange in the sky during that time?
Well, I didn't, but we had a number of friends who were off-road enthusiasts in our squadron, and some of them were friends with the air traffic controllers in the tower at the base. And we got a report that came from one of those controllers that there had been a UFO that had been shot down. And this was right about the time we had what was called a broken arrow, which was code speak for an unidentified aircraft approaching the U.S. coastline. And they were going to send, we actually launched 4 of our F-106s out to intercept this thing. So something crashed in I think it was the Cascade National Forest or the Rainier National Forest. And so we had a pretty good idea where this thing went down, and one of our squadron mates was a big Jeep off-road wheeling fan, so he went out there to investigate. And apparently, from what we heard, he had an encounter with the so-called Blue Berets, and they basically told him to turn around and leave without any questions, or they were going to arrest him and confiscate his vehicle. So that's as far as we got on that, but there was obviously something that happened, and coincidentally, the time frame of that incident corresponds directly with something that, who was the fellow who wrote Behold a Pale Horse? It was
Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper, yes. He was on a submarine in practically within the same week, leaving out of Bremerton, Washington, which was northwest of where McCord Air Force Base was located. And somewhere between Bremerton, Washington, and Hawaii, where they were going in the sub, they were cruising on the surface, and a huge craft of some kind came right out of the water, practically in front of their vessel. And he saw this thing, and he talks about it in that book. And so this is just sort of a moment of coincidence between something that he described seeing and the things that we had going on there in the squadron. But we never did find out what our planes were sent out to intercept because it was all classified. Very interesting. Let's take a break right here. We'll pick things up right there when we get back. Our guest tonight, Mark McCandlish. You can follow me, Jimmy Church, on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Email is jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Mark's website, markmccandlish.com. The links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. All you got to do is click and go and check it out. Very interesting stuff over on Mark's website. More with Mark when we come back. Stay with us.
is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
The station that talks the net. KGRA Radio.
Hello, you're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Hi, this is Ray Hobbs here, repping the planet, and you're listening to my good friend, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA Digital Broadcast Station.
This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to jimmychurchradio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier. And this is Ari Gold. We're of the Honey Brothers. Yes. We are of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
What's up, Fadernauts? Studio Dome loves Fade to Black and the F2B audience so much that they have put together the ultimate stereo Bluetooth system. They've done it just for you. Man, check this out. The Studio Dome SBB2 stereo system is here. It's featuring two Studio Boombox 2 SBB2 wireless Bluetooth speakers, packed in its own custom hardshell case. This Studio Dome system features the very latest in stereo Bluetooth technology. The two full-range boomboxes are in true wireless stereo. You've got to hear this. It's amazing. It's just $129 and use the promo code JCRTWS and you'll also get free shipping. It's simple. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the Studio Dome banner. Go Beckley Tepe.
Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies.
I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. I went from being able to work 14, 16 hours a day with no problem to where I could barely walk a block to the store. I went on to the phytonutrients about 6 months ago, and within a couple of months, my medical doctor had cut my prescriptions down in a little bit smaller dosage. The next time I went back a month later, I walked into the doctor's office and he says, "My gosh, what's happened to you? You don't even look like the same person." He looked at my legs and the swelling had gone down. My blood pressure was down. The venous stasis ulcers that I had had on my legs for the last 4 or 5 years because of the poor circulation were all healed, and I'm feeling far better.
The new challenge will allow you to receive 2 months of Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies free. And we'll even ship them to you free. Call now for details. Call 1-800-246-8751 or go online to balanceofnature.com. Use promo code TALK.
This is Micah Hanks of the Gralien Report, and you're listening to Jimmy Church on Fade to Black, across the globe on the Game Changer Radio Network and the one and only KGRA Radio, The Planet.
All right, welcome back, Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Mark McCandlish. He is an internationally recognized artist specializing in aviation and conceptual art within the defense and aerospace industries. He's been doing it for the better part of the last 30 years. Incredible life, but we're going to get all of this. You know, what's really strange here, Mark, is how all of this through the strength. You know, you never know how life is going to end up, right? And here you are, you're one of the guys, you're an aviation artist, you're doing what you love, and you're great at it. All of the tweets that have been going through here, everybody's been tweeting your artwork. And I know that the audience now is looking at this on Twitter going, holy crap, this is the guy that Church is talking to right now? Man, this guy is good, right? So at this point, did you have an interest in UFOs or ufology or ET or alien contact? Was that even a part of your life at this point?
Well, no. And the funny thing, this is the odd thing in answering your question. This is kind of the odd thing that happened to me as this story of the alien reproduction vehicle, or Fluxliner as it's been called, sort of came into my life. Because for years I had really been quite envious of my friends who said they'd seen UFOs and this kind of thing, and I wasn't sure whether to really believe it or whether there was anything incredible in the way of evidence that would support some of the stories that I'd heard. Even my brother had said when we were over in Germany at Ramstein that he'd been out playing one day and he saw a disc that would come out from behind a cloud, and he'd look up at it and it'd hide behind the cloud again, and a little while later it'd come out and he'd look at it and it'd fly back behind the cloud again, like I was playing hide and seek with him.
Right.
But I could not remember and had no awareness. And then after my dad retired from the Air Force and they moved off base, and my folks sold the house and this kind of thing, my mom, I think this is about the time that I was working. Right after I left General Dynamics, my mom was going through the attic, and she found all these old things that I'd written, essays and so forth that I'd written when I was in grammar school. One of them was from the time period of 1966 when we were on Westover Air Force Base, and it was entitled That Thing. And it was a complete description of a UFO sighting that I'd had at Westover Air Force Base that I had no recollection of. Now, I could not understand how that was even possible. But as I looked at this and I read the story and how I had gone outside with my telescope and I'd watched this thing for 10 minutes through this Gilbert Science Company 80-power reflector telescope and all this kind of stuff, I'm thinking to myself, I have no memory of this, and this is an incredible sighting. I mean, because we find out later that this thing was hovering directly over the alert aircraft, the nuclear-armed B-52s that they had in readiness to launch, at a moment's notice if the Russians decided to send a bunch of ICBMs over to the United States. These guys were ready to go. They were loaded for bear. And so I went to Yvonne Smith, who, as you may know, is a hypnotherapist who works with a lot of people who've been involved in the UFO abduction type phenomenon, does these regressions. And so she put me through the whole deal, where she hypnotized me and took me back through time. And on the occasion when I had this sighting, there was snow on the ground. It was extremely cold. I was so excited when I saw this thing, taking the dog out for the last time of the night before everybody went to bed, that I hadn't even put on a jacket when I hauled my telescope out into the yard, was watching this thing from 34B Mitchell Drive on Westover Air Force Base. I could tell you exactly where I was looking. I was looking sort of, I guess I would have been to the, I'd have to look at a map again, but anyway, it was, shooting directly across the street, looking at this thing, and I watched it for about 10 minutes, and then when it went to leave, it took off, executing a very quick S-turn as it departed. And, as Yvonne is regressing me, I'm actually re-experiencing the cold that I was living through on that night. And I'm sitting on her couch, laying on her couch, and my teeth are chattering because I'm re-experiencing the cold. It was that real.
Wow.
And so then, after she brought me through this experience, all these other memories come flooding back. I mean, you may have seen a photograph that appeared on numerous tabloids during that time frame showing what were alleged to be the shadows of a UFO fleet sort of being cast across the surface of the moon as these UFOs passed between the moon and the Earth. And I actually saw that through my telescope when I was watching the moon one night. There were all these other things. I mean, I had subscribed to Project Blue Book. I was getting all of that stuff in the mail from the U.S. Air Force. And so I was a fanatic. I mean, I was cutting out, in fact, the teacher in my classroom had given me an entire bulletin board, and I was doing sort of a news clipping service on UFO stories from all across the United States. And then, one day, the base commander's son confronted me. It was the little school that I was at the time. I don't remember the name of it. I think it was Seltzer Memorial, something like that. But there was sort of this cross-shaped floor plan where one axis went from the offices to the gymnasium. The other one was like the really long axis that had all the classrooms, and then the restrooms and everything were right at that crossroads. And so I was coming from the boys' room, going back to class, and there waiting for me in the crossroads, all by himself, was the base commander's son. With kind of a malevolent grin, and that's the last time that I remember everything about the UFO thing. It's almost like something from that Men in Black movie where they hold a little, ballpoint pen thing up in front of you and say, hey, look at this.
Right.
And the next thing you know, you don't remember anything. It was literally that abrupt.
Yeah, that's crazy.
History. And after that, I can remember now that the teacher said, "Well, we've had just about enough of the UFO thing, Mark. It's time for you to take all this stuff down." And I never went back to it again. That was it. It was like poof, it stopped right there. And for the life of me, I couldn't explain why that happened, but didn't have any memory of the UFO sighting. It was gone.
Wow.
And it wasn't until Yvonne hypnotically regressed me that any of this stuff came back. And the other coincidence is that I went to high school off the base after my dad retired from the Air Force in a little community called East Long Meadow, Massachusetts. And there was a fellow that I knew there whose father was he was one of the top managers at the local big Chevrolet store in the dealership in Springfield. I think it was Central Chevrolet, if I remember correctly. And I was working in new car detailing right out of high school to try and save up to go to college and that kind of thing. But this young man's father had actually been an officer on Westover Air Force Base back in 1966 when all this stuff had happened. And I mentioned it to his son, who's this friend of mine, just a year or two ago. And I said, I saw this happened. And he says, well, they had a code name for that thing, what happened, that incident. And it was called something like Operation Red Block. And I didn't know whether he meant that had to do with the deployment of B-52s or what the reaction was to this unidentified object coming in and hovering over the alert aircraft.
Right.
I never really found that out. But so, you start to line up all these coincidences on the timeline, and you begin to, weave a picture together about what happened, where, and when, and this kind of thing. So.
Interesting. Did you ever, especially with the internet today, did you go and check out Operation Red Block?
I've never been able to find anything about it. I can't say that I've actively pursued it, but I don't know. There may be something out there. I guess it's really just a matter of asking the right question. But the interesting thing too is that there was something similar to the NORAD Command Center that was all underground, not too far from Westover, that was called the Gap. And this facility, which went multiple stories under the ground, it was in this big granite rock formation somewhere between Westover and Amherst, Massachusetts, where the University of Massachusetts is. It has now become a decommissioned military site. It's now acting as a historical book archive facility where they keep all these ancient books that are really valuable, sort of deep underground where there's a controlled environment, so that preserves these books. But it'd be interesting to go there sometime and see what it would have been like back in the day when the military had the full control of this facility.
And so what is interesting for me, when the ARV started to come into your life, and that was, again, through a friend, and how that transpired, up to that point, really, UFOs was just how you described it in your life, right?
I'm sorry. Could you rephrase that question? I'm not sure I understand.
When the ARV story started to unfold for you, and how that happened, up to that point, your connection with the UFOs is just how you've described it. Your brother's
side. Pretty much non-existent. Yeah.
Yeah, it was non-existent, right?
Yeah. I probably had some books in my collection that I had picked up back in the '60s when I was, kind of fanatically following this thing. But they were, volumes that I had never cracked since that time. I think I even have an old dog-eared paperback copy of Frank Edwards' Flying Saucer Serious Business or something in my collection today that I got back then. But no, I was interested in cars and girls and music and playing guitars and maybe being in a band and all that kind of stuff. And the deflection of my chosen career, moving away from automotive design into something having to do with the defense industry, really sort of began to pivot after my time in the Air Force and after spending time at General Dynamics and seeing just how much exciting material was being developed for the Department of Defense and the Air Force in particular in those industries, aerospace and defense industries. And so that was a pretty exciting time. It's back, when Ronald Reagan was the president, and they were talking about the Star Wars Defense Initiative and this kind of thing, and so I got to see an awful lot of interesting hardware, a lot of things that still haven't been declassified. But the whole business of the ARV kind of came out of left field because I had done some artwork for a magazine, Popular Science magazine, that had to do with the alleged Mach 5 spy plane that kept passing back and forth over Los Angeles in the 1980s and leaving a supersonic shock print that was obviously moving at Mach 5, faster than the SR-71 Blackbird. And it took them a while to figure this out, that these weren't earthquakes, that it was actually a plane that was responsible for this footprint that was moving across the landscape. You can compute time distance between the quakes, and then you suddenly realize that this isn't a geological event. This is an astronomical or an aeronautical event.
I lived in Pasadena when that was going down, and it was loud. And it was really funny. It wasn't really any, regular. It was just out of the blue, just boom, right? And it's like, wow, what, and talked about on the news, and people were talking about it, and eventually the rumors started to come out that some people were saying it was the space shuttle, but there was no space shuttle flights, and there was that part, and then. The rumors started to spread about it being Aurora and this top secret, Mach 5 plane that was being test flown over Los Angeles. But it was a pretty consistent thing, and it was random, but it was consistent. It seemed like it was ongoing to the point where it stopped being remarkable. You know what I mean? It was that consistent. It was happening all the time. Were you in Los Angeles when this was going down?
Yes, I was, and surprisingly, I was never outside when one of these events happened, so I never actually saw or heard that. But I did know that being a sort of a religious subscriber to Aviation Week and space technology at that time, I knew that there were a lot of so-called fast movers that were being seen late at night up in the sky that would, they were obviously not satellites, and were obviously using some kind of very specialized propulsion system to be able to cross the sky at the speeds that they were. And typically they were following that same corridor that the sonic booms were happening along, which was sort of a southwest to northeast trajectory, which went from an area, sort of a military operations airspace off the coast of California, and sort of heading up in the direction of Area 51 north of Las Vegas. So that was something that I kind of confirmed for myself when I was out in the desert, especially up near Barstow or Mojave, late at night, where there's not a lot of light pollution to sort of detract from the clear visibility of the stars, and I could see these things moving across the sky, and even with a good set of binoculars, I mean, it was really nothing more than a bright point of light. And this is, of course, before the International Space Station became operational up there too. So, I knew that there was something going on. I just wasn't sure what. And so, in the latter part of 1988, I did this illustration on the Mach 5 spy plane. There was a young man that I had gone to college with at Art Center who had been in the transportation design curriculum, and he saw the artwork and called me up, and we got together for lunch. We started talking about some of the things that we were working with and some of the companies that we'd been involved in, and apparently he had sort of run a parallel course to mine, not as an artist so much, but as a designer working in aerospace and defense. So we had a lot of commonality in the clients we were working with and so forth. So I found out that there was going to be an air show at Norton Air Force Base, which was out sort of on the eastern edge of San Bernardino, California, about 75 miles east of Los Angeles. And there was a good chance they were going to have the SR-71 Blackbird there, either to do a flyby or as a static display on the ground.
Cool.
And so I invited this young man to join me, and he said that he might be bringing along one or two of his personal clients so we could maybe network some jobs and this kind of thing. And then at the last minute, this other illustration you can see on my Facebook page, the one having to do with the X-31 prototype, was a job that came to me on that very same weekend, and the magazine Popular Science was scrambling to sort of beat another publication to the gun, and they wanted to know if I could do 2 or 3 illustrations right over the weekend, and it was probably about $5,000 worth of work, and I couldn't turn it down because it was too much of an opportunity, so I didn't go to the air show. And it was about a week or so later that I called my friend up, and I said, well, how'd you enjoy the air show? And then he said to me something that really surprised me, and that was that he thought that he had seen some things he was not supposed to see. I said, well, how is that possible? Everything that's on display there has already been cleared for public display. And he says, well, there was a separate exhibit, and, there were some... He says, let's have some lunch. I don't want to talk about this on the phone. So we get together for lunch, and he proceeds to tell me that they had gone into this big hangar and that there had been this display with a number of sort of weird-looking sort of advanced technology hovercraft. There was a losing competitor in the B-2 bomber competition that had been built by a joint team of Rockwell International and Lockheed. And then there was something that had been referred to as the Aurora, the first-generation Aurora, in the hangar as well, and that this thing looked kind of like a deflated football, and that it was entirely covered with black space shuttle tiles, was designed as a remotely operated vehicle. It had a pair of infrared cameras up at the front end of it, and it had 121 vertical launch tubes in its belly that allowed it to deploy either conventional weapons or nuclear-tipped weapons from a low Earth orbit. It even had a kind of a clamshell type of opening in the very back end of this afterbody, the tapered afterbody in this thing, had sort of a compartment that would open up, and a rocket engine would kind of poke out of there and allow it to accelerate up and go into space and loiter almost indefinitely with a full weapons payload. So this was very surprising to me. And but then he said that a little bit later in the show, they pull back the curtains, and there are 3 flying saucers hovering there in the hangar.
Hovering is the key word.
Yes, no landing gear, and nothing suspending them from above. And this was what he had found so stunning in the presentation.
Yeah, as if
caught him off guard.
Right, as if the Aurora or the B-2 loser, right, wasn't enough, especially for somebody like you.
Yeah.
I mean,
really.
Well,
so of course, I just overwhelmed him with questions, and I think that part of what happened at that point was that I think that he needed to talk to somebody. He really did, because I think that what he saw kind of changed his perception of reality. It didn't have quite that impact for me, because first and foremost, this young man had always sort of struck me as someone who really enjoyed exaggerating the things that he said. He was notorious in college for copying other people's ideas and then combining many different ideas into his own design schemes and ideas that he did. And there were a lot of people that really were angry about that, and I was one of them at the time. But I took what he was telling me with a grain of salt. I wasn't really sure whether or not I believed it. But it kept banging around in the back of my mind, and I'd call him up, weeks or months later, and I'd say, well, what about this, and what about that, and how did they do this, and so I'd get a little bit more information, and this went on for probably 9 months until I got to a point where I had taken all these little rough drawings that he did out of frustration with trying to explain to me what something looked like or how it was configured. And I took all these sketches, all these little ideas, and I sat down and put on my draftsman's hat, and I mapped out how this thing was configured, how it was laid out from top to bottom with the relative sizes and everything. And I made a blueprint of this thing. I sent it off to him in the mail. And we talked on the phone shortly after he got this thing. And he says to me, Mark, he says, you've charted out just about everything on this vehicle exactly the way that it looked. And in fact, he said it's accurate in just about every respect. And he says, if you're smart, he says, you'll tear this thing up and throw it away, and you'll never talk about it or do another drawing of it again, because he says this is probably the most dangerous illustration you've ever done in your life. That's how serious this is. So obviously, I didn't follow his advice.
Right.
But the thing is that there were defects in that story that were brought to my attention later on by other people who knew a lot about high security clearance issues. Namely, how could someone like my friend, who apparently didn't have a clearance, at least that was my belief at the time, how could he get into a show like this just on the word of someone that he was with? Now, at first, he identified who his escort was. It was one of the people he was going to network jobs with me when I met him, or thought I was going to meet him at this air show. And I thought he said Frank Carlucci, the Secretary of Defense. But it turned out that years later, I discovered that it was not Frank Carlucci. In fact, it was a high-ranking Lockheed Skunk Works official whose first name was Frank, but his last name sounded very much like Carlucci. But it was a different Italian name, pretty much the same number of symbols, but it was not Frank Carlucci. And so, I really don't want to go too much further with the identity of that man. I know who he is, and I've pretty much got an idea of where and what he's doing. He's retired from Lockheed now, but he's. I found that there are other researchers that the minute I open my mouth and I say anything about individuals or people who were known to be involved in these things, that there are people out there who tenaciously have these directories that they can access on the internet that help them track down somebody's phone number and address and stuff. And I've had people that have gone right up to some of these witnesses that rightfully probably expected that anything they told me would be confidential. And, not being a journalist, I didn't know any better.
Right.
But, when I became one of the witnesses in the Disclosure Project, I was encouraged to name names and that kind of thing, and it was probably the dumbest thing I ever did, because people's careers and lives were harmed by that approach, and the whole philosophy of doing that was to make sure that they would be safe, and that if they were out in the open and identified, that nothing would happen. But that's not true. Things do happen to people, and there are people that that I've worked with that have had some terrible things that have happened to them.
And what
Not
about
necessarily...
you? Well, what about you
Go ahead.
personally? Were you contacted too after the first disclosure hearing?
Yeah, there was a fellow by the name of Gordon Novell who threatened me on a regular basis for almost 25 years straight.
Right.
He claimed that he had been a CIA asset, which the CIA denies vehemently and has pretty much all along the course. Right after I went to Washington in 2001 for the Disclosure Project presentations that were there, in the hopes of getting some kind of congressional hearing and this sort of thing, this fellow left a message on my phone, basically saying, "I can't wait to see how my buddies at CIA have you whacked." Right. This is the kind, but every phone call was peppered with the most foul language you can imagine, Jimmy. I mean, it was intolerable. In fact, it got so bad at one point in just about the early 2000s, where I became so infuriated. I contacted local police. I had an officer come over and listen to these messages, which were full of threats. And, they basically said, well, what do you think the chances of this guy showing up on your doorstep and shooting you really are? And I said, well, I don't honestly know. He lives in Las Vegas right now, and I couldn't tell you that. But the messages became so awful, so nasty, so toxic, that at one point I literally became so enraged that I called my girlfriend up and said, I'm loading up my P226 9mm Sig Sauer. I'm going to Las Vegas, and I'm going to kill this guy.
Right.
And bless her heart, she said to me, you will damage your soul and you will damage your heart if you do that. Don't let this man and his toxic personality destroy you, because he would love nothing more than to be able to do that to you. Because part of the problem was that this Gordon Novell character learned about what I had to say and approached me in a very friendly way, in 1989 or 1990, about sort of breaking out this technology, breaking it out of the black world and turning into commercial opportunities for not only energy production, but for transportation, space exploration, all of the, the sort of wonderful things that we hope that this technology would be used for in a public way, to improve the knowledge base of the human species and exploration, all those great things, relieve the planet of pollution and the kind of, terrible consequences that happen when there's an earthquake off the coast of Japan and Fukushima breaks down and you've got radioactive cesium throughout the entire Pacific Ocean. those are the kinds of things that I hoped would never happen if this technology was actually brought out into the so-called white world, where this technology could be developed commercially and people could benefit from it, and the world could benefit from it. That's all what I've always hoped. That was always my motivation behind saying anything. Unfortunately, that's not what has happened. So, but
was this the Gordon Novell that was got wrapped up in the JFK story?
Yeah, same guy. Yeah,
what?
he
oh my God!
Some people think that he was the umbrella man,
right?
David Plaza,
right?
And of course, he denies that. In fact, I remember we were driving through Los Angeles one time because his driver's license had been confiscated from him because he had been caught on multiple occasions doing over 100 miles an hour through towns in Texas or someplace. And so we're riding in the car, and I asked him about that, about the JFK assassination, and he basically felt that. At least according to him, that it had more to do with the mafia being disappointed by the fact that the Bay of Figs incident had not culminated in the removal of Castro, so they could reopen all their casinos down in the Cuba area, and so apparently they felt betrayed by Kennedy, and that was what motivated the assassination of Kennedy. I honestly don't know if that's the case, but this is what he said he believed was going on.
Man,
and then he actually said he applauded the fact that someone was successfully able to do that, to pull it off and never get caught, and I thought that was appalling. And
well,
so it was
I've got to
point...
jump in, Mark. I'm so blown away that I floated right past a commercial break. I can't believe it was that Gordon Novell. That your life is getting more interesting by the minute, and we're going to pick this up when we come back. Our guest tonight, the one and only Mark McCandlish. This is Fade to Black. Stay right there.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church.
You're listening to Fade to Black.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk. Jimmy Church with Fade to Black. KGRARadio.com.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Oh, fall. My favorite time of year. Cooler temperatures and, well, let's be honest, layers. Lots and lots of layers. Look, I get it. We all have that favorite hoodie. Matter of fact, I've got a few favorite hoodies. You should wear yours. Enjoy it. I do. But I stay focused on my health year-round. And for me, I take Nature's Youth RSF from nature'syouth.com. Nature's Youth RSF from nature'syouth.com. I eat right, control my portion sizes, still maintain a commitment to regular fitness, and I get plenty of rest, and I take Nature's Youth RSF. It's okay to cover up your beach body for a few months, but don't just forget about it. Nature's Youth understands exactly what it means to provide top-quality health products, and Nature's Youth customers not only improve their health, they know they're also providing their body with the right nourishment to maintain peak performance levels and fight the aging process. So layer up and get started today with Nature's Youth RSF. nature'syouth.com. Simple to use, even simpler to order. Go to nature'syouth.com. That's nature'syouth.com.
You are listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Welcome back. Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Mark McCandlish, artist, aviation, conceptual art. One of the best. All of his illustrations have managed to wind up on Twitter, so you can jump over and check all of those out. And Mark, I just want to let you know, we could talk about Gordon for the next 2 or 3 hours, okay? And we have to backpedal, pump the brakes on that because, you've just blown my mind completely. And
well, you know that George Knapp over at Coast to Coast had interviewed him at one point also.
Yes,
before he passed away, right?
Oh yeah. You said it. You said his name, and it just kind of wait. That.
Where do I know that from?
Yeah, oh man. All right. Let's jump forward before we run out of time in this segment here. Let's get back on the ARV because I do want to talk about not only how that story unfolded and so forth, but also how it's what do I want to call it? It's not really an engine, but how it gets around. I want to get
propulsion
into
system.
There you go. You're smarter than I am. And then we're going to open up the phone lines at the top of the hour. So we're back on the ARV. You did the public presentation on it back in 2001. But before that presentation, you gathered all of the information that you could on that, and the story is spy versus spy. It's really crazy how everything did get put together on that. So let's go back to that and visit a few of these Air Force bases.
Okay. Well, the thing was that originally, as the story evolved, and that's been one of the problems with this entire story is that it has evolved, and so people look back and they say, well, back in 1993 you were saying XYZ, and now you're saying something different.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fact is that part of the problem with stories like this, especially when you have people that are really worried about making disclosures and having their name pop up somewhere in a magazine or on the air in a radio show, is that people are reluctant to talk until they feel reassured that you're not going to bring them into public domain in the discussion of this kind of technology. And so that's one of the things that I have learned is to kind of keep that stuff below the radar so that these people don't have anything to worry about. But originally the story went that the exhibit that this young man saw happened in the big, giant Quonset hut-style hangar at Norton Air Force Base, which I believe is still there, and it's a Lockheed-owned facility. There are accounts from some of the other Disclosure Project witnesses who say that there was, in fact, an alien reproduction vehicle at Norton Air Force Base, that there was a section owned by Lockheed where they did have something on display. And that included sightings that I had from a cement truck driver, of all things, who worked at a big cement factory that was just off the east end of the runway for Norton Air Force Base, who had seen the first-generation Aurora, the one that looked like the deflated football, leaving Norton Air Force Base at around the same time of the air show that had occurred there, being escorted by a couple of fully armed F-15s. And he was able to properly identify the fact that this aircraft, the Aurora, it was called the Pulsar actually, had a very specific kind of tire, a tire unlike anything that you've ever seen. If you've ever been to a hot rod show and you've seen some of these special hoses that they put on some of the high-performance cars that look like a braided stainless steel mesh wire around the hoses.
Right.
Well, imagine a segment of that wrapped around a wheel, and that's what the tires looked like on this aircraft.
Interesting.
That was because this thing was encountering so much heat when it was flying at speed that it would burn up the tires. And so, these were some of the things that came together, so I couldn't quite be sure whether or not the exhibit had happened in Norton or not. But later, Gordon had befriended the same young man that had shared the story with me. He was trying to encourage him to come over to his side and tell him everything that he knew so he could, bring this technology into a commercial application. And so he brought together all of these business leaders and people who had money, and they met down in Palm Desert. This is probably around 2000 or so. And the young man, Brad, was there, and he told the whole story, but he elaborated on the things, all the blank spots that had happened before, and that was that this group of people, these high-ranking congressional and senatorial officials who had the clearances and high-ranking military brass that were there at Norton Air Force Base were all loaded onto a Boeing 727 military transport, and they were flown up to Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale, which is where Lockheed Skunk Works is located. They disembarked from the aircraft, they went into the hangar, and it was at that point when his escort said to him, I can see that there are some things in here that you're not cleared to see, so keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, don't ask any questions, and we'll get out of here as soon as we can. But then what I found out was, and this is only recently, that if you happen to be a physicist or a mathematician or a designer or an architect or an aerospace engineer, and you happen to be a particularly brilliant talent in this area, and you somehow cross paths with somebody like Ben Rich or Kelly Johnson or some of the bigwigs at Lockheed or just about any other aerospace company, many times they will actually make you a protege of one of these top dogs in the aerospace industry, and when they assign you a security clearance, they don't do the traditional background check that everyone else, like I went through, would go through. And that is they create a second pass card with the name of your sponsor, the guy whose protege you happen to be,
right?
And they put your name and his name on there, but his name has a -2 after it, like it's a second security clearance card issued to the guy who is your sponsor. And that's how Brad was able to get through. That's how he was able to get in.
Like a grandfather, like a grandfathered in.
Yes, yeah, and that was how it happened. And so all the chips started to fall together in the puzzle, so to speak, and I began to realize that it made more sense if the exhibit actually occurred under the much more controlled environment of the Lockheed Skunk Works, where they can section off parts of what used to be the hangar where they developed and built the L-10-11 Lockheed TriStar airliner back in the 60s or the early 70s. And so that's where they moved the Skunk Works after it left the Burbank Airport.
Right.
And they go in and they see these things, and the exhibit consisted of these 3 discs, and I can't tell you how many times people have repeated my story without asking me, without talking to me, and they get all the numbers wrong, and it really bugs me when this happens. But the 3 different sizes were 24 feet, 60 feet, and 120 feet. These vehicles were all hovering off the floor, the smallest of which, the 24-foot diameter version, was the closest to the rope that cordoned off this section of the hangar. There was a small platform and a podium. There's a 3-star general that got up and talked about the alien reproduction vehicle / Fluxliner, and described the vehicles as having a capability of traveling at light speed or better. In other words, faster than the speed of light,
right?
Which, under any other context, would mean warp drive, that kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, when I heard all this, the very basic, the bare bones story of his seeing this vehicle, of course, I wanted to know what it was about, and he described this circular array on the bottom of the vehicle. There was all these parallel plate capacitors that were embedded in this glass-like substance, which I later found out was basically melted down or slumped Herkimer quartz diamond. It's a very special kind of quartz that's mined in one place in the world, in the United States anyway. It's either in the state of New York or Pennsylvania. I can't remember which of the states that's in right now. But the crystals that you find of this particular substance, when you dig them up out of the ground, tend to be almost complete as a double-terminated crystal, sometimes as long as 8 inches long, optically clear, very few occlusions or little particles of dirt and dust, whatever might be in there. So from the optic standpoint, it's almost optically perfect right out of the ground. And if you went to buy an 8-inch long double-terminated crystal of Herkimer quartz diamond, you might spend as much as $3,000 or $4,000. That's how expensive it is. So imagine you have a wafer a foot thick and 24 feet in diameter. You're talking about almost 10 tons of quartz, not to mention all the plates that are inside of it for the capacitor sections. And this is your dielectric material. And one of the things that he said was that in order to improve the performance of the system, they're actually doping the quartz with heavy elements like uranium and things like that.
Wow.
So I don't pretend to understand the physics of all of this and why it worked better that way, except that the difference between the weight of the vehicle, or I should say the mass of the vehicle in its steady state condition, and then the version or the condition that it existed in once it was fully energized, meant that there was a much greater difference between its steady state and its demassed condition, which apparently meant that it would accelerate at a much higher pace. So, but the system itself was designed with what looked like a large Tesla coil that wrapped around the crew compartment. And if you're familiar with any of the other literature in the UFO history, especially post Roswell, New Mexico, if you look at the account of the crash that occurred near Aztec, New Mexico, they described the same kind of coils wrapping around the crew compartment, and that in fact the military, when they were evaluating this design, felt that the coils that were wrapped around the crew compartment were very significant. In fact, they classified that part of the discovery almost immediately. But then again, if you look through the story of this meteorologist who worked for the Air Force out at Indian Springs Air Force Base, who Richard Hall, I believe his name is, who talked about his encounters with the tall whites, a race of aliens that apparently are vacationing here from time to time, from what he says. Mm-hmm. In his discussions with that particular species, they also indicated that there was a special set of coils that wrapped around the crew compartment that were exploiting things like mesons and things like that. So, you start looking through this and you try to figure out, how does all of this work? How does it all come together? The system looks remarkably like a device that was based on the work of Thomas Townsend Brown and the Beefield-Brown effect, where you would be able to levitate something using an extremely powerful electrical charge that was stored on capacitors. Now, many of the lifters that you see in these videos from J.L. Nadine and others on the internet, on YouTube, they are open-air capacitor systems. That is, there's no dielectric to speak of other than the air itself between the different sections of the capacitor, the positive and the negative plates. And so when people have tried to test these things at high voltage in a relatively medium to medium hard vacuum, where there's absolutely no air in the chamber at all, you get arc over between the electrical components, between the parts of the capacitor. And so they say, well, of course, this thing will never work in the vacuum of space. But they've never, to my knowledge anyway, in any of these videos, tested the plates inside of a quartz dielectric where they're completely insulated from one another. Because I think that if they were able to do that, they would find very quickly that these things do work, and very effectively work, in the vacuum of space. But from what I've been able to see, go ahead.
Yeah, with the design that they have here of the ARV, and I'm speaking specifically about the Air Force, it is the classic, flying saucer. And if the Air Force was indeed, which I know that they were, but were test flying these and flying these around at low speed before they were, leaving the Earth or doing whatever with them, this is what was being photographed and seen all over the United States in that huge flying saucer wave, isn't it? Because the
classic bell-shaped saucers. Yeah.
Right. Is do you think that is what was going on?
Well, it's certainly possible. The earliest photograph that I've been able to find of the so-called alien reproduction vehicle was a photograph that was taken from a C-47 aircraft flying near Provo, Utah, in I think it was July of 1966. But I've later found a witness, a fellow who was a crew chief working at Edwards Air Force Base in 1973, one of the several years that I was in the Air Force myself, and he actually worked on a plane with Aviation Week and Space Technology editor William Scott, who of course was on UFO Hunters with Bill Burns.
Right.
But this guy was a test pilot out at Edwards, and the fellow that I ran into was one of the crew chiefs working on one of the planes that he was testing. And he described in 1973 being told at the end of his shift, or close to it, that at 1 o'clock in the morning or something, that there was a hydraulic power unit for an aircraft. We called them mules when I was in the Air Force, because they would leak oil and fluid all over the flight line and create a mess like a mule might.
Right.
But he was asked to go over to Edwards North Base, where they keep all the classified aircraft, and he was asked to pick up this mule, this ground power unit, and tow it back to the depot where they would do maintenance on it, and then he could go home for the evening. And so, like most 20-year-old men at that time, young man, he said, well, you know, if I take this tow vehicle, which can do like 12 miles an hour tops because it's geared so low, if I take it on perimeter road around the dry lake bed where they were landing the shuttle, and I try to pick this thing up and tow it back, he says, it'll take me 2.5 hours to get there and back because the thing's traveling so slowly. So what he decided to do was just cut straight across the dry lake bed and go up into the complex of North Base without notifying anybody at the gate that he was taking an alternative route. And so they weren't waiting for him, you know, coming off the dry lake bed. And so he gets up into the tarmac area where all these Quonset hut type buildings are located, and he sees one with the doors slightly cracked down the line. Lights are on, so he rolls down there. He pulls up in front of the crack, looks in, and sees an ARV. And as I'm talking to this guy, I met him at an air show. I was, well, you know, what did you see? It was flat on the bottom. It had sloping sides, a little ledge, and then dome on the top with these little blisters that looked like they had like a camera or something under each one. And so I drew a sketch for him on a little envelope I had of a Kodak lens cleaning tissue for my camera system. And he says, oh, you've seen one. And I said, no, but I didn't know until this moment that the story that I'd heard previously was actually true. And that was the story involving around Brad and this thing going on at Skunk Works on November 12th, 1988, during the time of that same air show that occurred there. So you know, that was my second real confirmation right there. And you know, when I talked to Bill Scott about this, because he knew this fellow, he went and interviewed him, talked to him at length about what had happened there, and the people at Aviation Week were so blown away by the material that was in this interview, they opted not to publish it in the magazine because they felt that it might damage their reputation. And they had, you know, a reputation for being, you know, on the leading edge of reporting as far as anything in the aerospace and defense industries were concerned, especially regarding aircraft. So,
and being accurate,
they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Right. Being accurate because they were ahead of the game, and the things that they published needed to happen. Right.
Right. No, well, but this is also the time frame in which Philip Klass, who was, you know, the classic UFO skeptic,
right,
he worked at Aviation Week about the same time. I don't think he was actually employed there, but he was sort of an independent consultant for them. He'd worked for them for many years. And when he got wind of this thing, he basically said, you know, this is not going to fly with the magazine, and I'm going to make sure that it doesn't, because, you know, we don't want this kind of stuff on the pages of our magazine.
Right. Did Klass,
you know, whether it was true or not. You know?
Right. Did Klass ever contact you, by the way?
No, he never did.
Okay.
And it would have been an interesting discussion, to say the least.
Yeah, no kidding. I wish he was still around. I would love to have a couple of minutes alone with him, but that's another story. Okay, so back to this. Before we get to a break, the panels on the ARV and the general construction of it, when we are talking about something at the speed of light, or you know, this type of speed and the ability, you look at the ARV and it doesn't look that robust. It doesn't look like it can get out of the atmosphere. It looks like it would fall apart, you know. And I know you know where I'm going with this.
Oh yeah.
How?
Well, I can answer your question for you. I think your question is, how is this thing able to do such extraordinary, feats of maneuvering? I mean, you know, stopping on a dime, right angle turns at 9,000 miles an hour through the atmosphere, this kind of thing. The best way for me to describe it would be if you took a little plastic bathtub toy and filled it with just the right amount of water so that it would be suspended in the middle of a goldfish bowl full of water. And then you take the goldfish bowl and you move it all around really fast, and you see that the object in the middle has not moved relative to the outside of the fishbowl. And it's kind of, I think, what they call in physics uniform acceleration. What you're doing is you're creating, because of the way the propulsion system reacts with space-time, you're creating what is called a dynamically engineered local space-time. And this is according to a paper that was written in March of 94, published in 94, by Miguel Alcubierre, who was a physicist working over in the UK. And he describes how if you're able to create what amounts to a compression and an expansion simultaneously in space-time, that you can create a vector, an acceleration in a particular direction. But because of the way this particular feat is engineered, you're actually creating what amounts to a bubble of space-time that moves together as one complete entity. And that includes not only the spacecraft that creates this dynamically engineered local space-time, but it includes some of the surrounding atmosphere. And so what happens is, in fact, there was a paper in 2010 that was published by Hal Puthoff in the Journal of British Interplanetary Society. It was talked about metric engineering in the title in 2010. And one of the side effects of this kind of metric engineering is you have two things happen. You change the flow rate of time. Time begins to run faster inside this particular dynamically engineered or modified space-time. Imagine a bubble where the flow of time is moving much more quickly. Let's say you're looking at a guy who's in the flying saucer, and you're outside that disturbed region of space-time, and you're watching him, and you notice that he looks like he's on a film clip where everything has been sped up dramatically. We're zooming around the cockpit of the vehicles, doing all these different things at just hyperspeed. But to him, on the inside, looking out, it looks as though the world has frozen in time. Things that would normally move at 65 miles an hour down the freeway are moving literally at the pace of a snail. And so if you imagine that you're able to accomplish this from the idea of some physical engineering of the environment, of space-time itself, this allows you to do several things, one of which is that you can appear to move through space-time, through the air, through the atmosphere of the Earth, what would be recorded at speeds in excess of 9,000 miles an hour, which I think is probably something like Mach 5, and that when you do this, the molecules of air that come inside of, within this dynamically engineered space-time, they suddenly accelerate and begin to match the local pace of time inside that environment. And so for them, it doesn't seem as though the vehicle is really pushing the air aside with any kind of real energy transfer, because they have now been accelerated to that same type of pace of time that's within this disturbed region. And so they go through it, and out the backside, and there's no real energy transfer, so you don't see the shock wave. You don't see the supersonic shock wave that would accompany your normal supersonic aircraft, like the B-2, or the B-1 bomber or an F-16 or something doing Mach 1. You don't see that shock wave because there's no energy transfer, because the air molecules themselves are momentarily captured by this different flow of time. But they, at the same time, the same environment appears to completely demass anything that passes through it. So when something essentially loses its mass, there's no inertia. If there's no inertia, there's no friction during the displacement process. If there's no displacement, energy transfer, then there's no supersonic shock wave.
Well,
so you
would
can see things moving.
Well, I have to jump in. We're going to take a break. Would
Okay.
you would the craft effectively disappear too as well? Would you not see it anymore?
You're almost right. What happens is its general size, as it would appear from the outside of if you're looking in at this disturbed region of space-time, it actually appears much smaller, maybe the size of a basketball.
Right.
And think about the orbs they see flying over the crop circles in the UK when they're being built.
Right.
There you go. See?
Yeah, and
could be a whole spaceship.
And there was somebody just tweeted this. I want to give somebody credit here. I think it was Gabriel. Brought up a really interesting point. Could this craft? I guess it wouldn't be a big deal to make this a sphere as well. It wouldn't matter about the shape of the craft, would it?
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah, very
In fact,
interesting.
The early design for something very similar to this was proposed by Nikola Tesla back in the 1920s, I believe. It was called an ionocraft. And it looked like a ball.
Let's take a break right here. Our guest tonight, Mark McCandlish. We're talking about the ARV. And when we come back, Mark, you want to take some phone calls?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll mingle those into the conversation. 323-825-5045. Our guest, Mark McCandlish. More about the ARV when we come back. Stay with us.
Hi, everybody. This is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
KGRA Radio. Intelligent talk.
You've probably heard about all the great benefits of goat milk soap, but did you know some companies take shortcuts? At Old New England Soap, we make our organic goat's milk soap using 36% goat's milk. That's 17% more than most others. Our bars are larger, so they last longer, producing lots of lather packed with vitamins. And our soap is a natural moisturizer that smooths dry and damaged skin. Order online at oldnesoap.com. That's oldnesoap.com. You've tried the rest. Now try the best. oldnesoap.com.
Water-based soaps on supermarket shelves use harsh chemical acids to break down dead skin cells. And that's just not good for you. At Old New England Soap, our soaps are made without chemical ingredients, contain no alcohol or petroleum products, and use 85% organic materials and carry the USDA's organic certification. Try some today. Go to oldnesoap.com. That's oldnesoap.com. oldnesoap.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
If you have sciatica, then you know all about the crippling pain that travels from your lower back down your leg when a spasm occurs. It's brutal. In fact, it's enough to take your breath away. Dr. Zhang's Sciatica Nerve Cream helps relieve persistent, shooting pains associated with the sciatic nerve in the lower back and legs. This natural, homeopathic cream contains the most potent ingredients to soothe even the most excruciating pain associated with sciatica. Stop the pain now. Ask for Dr. Zhang's Sciatica Nerve Cream at your local health food store or go online to trasknutrition.com.
Would you like relief from muscle pain, headaches, and discomfort to sleep better, have more energy during the day, and just feel naturally amazing? Fibromalic can help. Its blend of malic acid and magnesium can provide pain relief and comfort for those who experience fibromyalgia. It helps your body absorb more oxygen, and it works quickly for a significant reduction in pain within 48 hours, all without a prescription. Ask for Fibromalic at health and vitamin shops or shop fibromalic.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of Fade to Black by just calling 605-562-4482. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Just call 605-562-4482. You can listen to me, Jimmy Church, on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Go Beckley Tappy.
You want to know a secret? I love ponies. I really love ponies. I'm serious. I couldn't stay sane without ponies to brush.
Why Fade to Black? Because you never got that pony, damn it.
This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Mark McCandlish. Yes, he is an internationally recognized artist, specializing in aviation and conceptual art within the defense and aerospace industries for the better part of the last 30 years. And tonight we're discussing the ARV, the Alien Reproduction Vehicle. And Mark, before we get back to the discussion, I want to bring in a couple of phone calls really quick. But and one of the things that is mind-blowing about the ARV is how technically simple it is. You know, there isn't a huge dials and buttons and computers, and no, its flight control system is well, it's advanced, but it's actually very simple. And all of the things that we consider of being hurdles or things that would be nearly impossible are actually very simple, because so many things are taken off of the table, like the effects of G-forces and gravity and all of that, you can pretty much do whatever you want to do at that very moment, can't you?
You really can. Yeah, I mean, it offers you a surprising array of possibilities, not only being able to go from point A to point B at a really dramatic pace through the atmosphere, in excess of 9,000 miles an hour, without creating a supersonic footprint, but out in space, within just a few minutes, probably up to and beyond the speed of light, which means that a system like this is probably capable of interstellar travel. So when you think back to Ben Rich making a statement at the end of a presentation at UCLA that we can now take ET home,
right.
It takes on totally new significance in that light.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the greatest quotes of all time, no doubt. And when it comes from Ben Rich, you have to take that immediately at face value. So, let's go to the phones. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Say hi to Mark McCandlish.
Hey, Jim, thanks for having Mark on, and I got some good news and bad news for you. I knew about this back in '65, all these secrets, and I promised to keep the secret, and I waited until the person that gave me the information passed away, and I was sure of that, and I'm just surprised because here's the problem. I've been telling people this since 2012, all these secrets you're revealing on the radio, just because the person died, I promised to keep it secret. Now Mark, you're on the radio talking out of class, fella, and I'm surprised you're still walking and talking and not being stalked.
Well, I share your surprise, and I've said it many times that honestly, when I think back about the revelations that I've made, that something hasn't happened to me. But I can tell you that there are other people who have pursued this story. James Allen Higgins, the filmmaker who produced the video, you can see up on Vimeo or YouTube. It's called 0 Point: The Story of Mark McCandlish and the Fluxliner. He was murdered using radioisotopes. We've got the pathology report to prove it. He had uranium, thorium, cadmium, just a shopping list of all the heavy metals and radioisotopes that you could put into something that would eventually lead to someone having a very aggressive cancer, and that's exactly what he died of within 2 months after he was diagnosed. And that was right as he was finishing the final editing of the film.
Okay, now what was the year that he was killed?
I believe it was 2012.
Oh, boy. That's dangerous. So you're still walking and talking. But here's the problem. My teacher was brother-in-law of Phil Corso, and that's how I got the information. And I had to promise, I had to swear up and down the Bible 1,000 times before he would start sharing things. The problem is you're talking to the average person on the street, which they're probably clueless as far as science goes, and I don't know how you deal with it, but I'm having a hard time trying to get people to believe what I'm telling them.
Well, I can sympathize with your position because I've been there. I mean, there are a lot of people I know that they're very interested in the subject because they may have seen a UFO or something in the sky that did things that seemed impossible, and they were really at a loss to explain it. But would you sit down with someone who really doesn't have any kind of an interest or any pursuit of science, just out of their own personal interest, it gets really difficult to explain how any of this is possible. I try in my presentations, for example, there's one coming up in March 24th, 25th, 26th in San Francisco. It's a California UFO convention. I try in those presentations to explain to people that, there are some basic things that you need to understand about how the physical world works. And if you can tweak those things, I mean, without really violating the laws of physics like general relativity or special relativity, but there are ways that you can trick nature into giving you everything that you want, not only free energy, which is a real thing. There really are devices out there that create energy that seems to come out of nowhere. And there really are propulsion systems that can completely demass a vehicle. And, as long as there's no mass in the equation, then traveling faster than the speed of light is not really a barrier. And once people understand that there are ways that you can get around, you can do a workaround and completely be within the scientific literature if you really, really look at it closely. it opens up a whole new world of imagination for everybody, even the people who don't understand. I mean, I could not do a physics equation to save my life, but what I do is I read these papers and I read the paragraphs between those equations that explain what the equations mean, and then I understand it. I can't do the math, but I can explain what that math means.
Thank you for the phone call and excellent points, by the way. And I want to say this, Mark, that if anything did happen to you, then everything is true, right? You're a martyr.
Well, yeah, and I think that's been mentioned before, that may in fact be the reason that if anything, the thing that bothers me most is when people go up on the internet with these talks that they've given at MUFON presentations or independently, and they've basically used my artwork, used my story, used my likeness, haven't asked me, did it without my permission, and then they get all the facts wrong. It makes me very mad because that does nothing but undermine the credibility of the original story, which is a true story. So this is the thing that the one really shining exception to all that is Dr. Stephen Greer, who has been very clear on the specifics of the story and has been very good about keeping the facts straight in his presentations. And I really love Steve Greer. He's a fantastic person, does a great service to all of us. And so I just try to keep things straight as best I can. But the biggest problem of all has been that the story has evolved over time. And so when you go back and you have to realign when and where certain things happened, and find that something has changed or the circumstances were different than you thought, you have to kind of go back and organize it a little bit more so that you can understand exactly what happened and when.
Now, I am going to tweet up in real time right now your illustration of the flight control system and the ball controller. And so let's go ahead and go through that, and it's your three views of the flight control system. Why don't you take the audience through that? Okay.
Let's see. I'm going to try and pull that illustration up here also on my Facebook page. Okay, there it is. All right. In this particular illustration, what you see is the armrest on the close side of an ejection seat. I haven't drawn in the entire ejection seat, basically just the armrests and the upper cushion, lower cushion. And on the armrest is a vertical post that has a curl on the end of it. It looks kind of like an inverted candy cane. And it has a pivoting locking mechanism that's right at the point where it connects to the armrest of the ejection seat. And this component has a fiber optic cable that comes out of the bottom of it and goes into the armrest and then down through some other components in the chair itself. That basically is one of the flight control elements for the craft. Now, what you see there looks like a ball that is suspended or attached to the very end of that inverted candy cane or J shape. There's a kind of a locking mechanism on the top of it, look kind of like a little small cylinder with sort of a knurled texture on it. And then conforming to the bottom half of that sphere is a bowl that's shaped like the lower half of a sphere, except that it hugs the ball. And the way this thing works, from what I understand, is that there is a laser diode emitter that's on the inside of this thing, and it shoots a beam down into a kind of a mirror that is mounted in that bowl that swivels from side to side. And that the reflected laser light then goes up to the inside of the sphere where you have photodiode receptors that are basically the primary switching mechanism. It's the first point of contact that tells the system which capacitor sections in that array around the bottom of which there are 48 individual sections, like the slices of a very thinly sliced pizza pie, if you will. And each of those capacitor sections has 8 horizontal parallel plates. Those plates are all tied together, 4 positive and 4 negative plates at the inner end, so there's only 2 little, like a plug, like a 2-pin plug, that plugs into the system. And at that end, there is a type of what do they call it? A solenoid-type device. It's a magnetic coil that has a little switching mechanism that moves back and forth that controls the high current so that it doesn't leak out into other parts of the system. So when the photodiode receives a certain amount of that laser light on the inside of this sphere, it tells that particular capacitor section to turn on, to become part of the circuit. And in fact, there are ways in which the amount of voltage that goes to each of these capacitor sections can be raised dramatically, because on the other armrest, something that you really can't see in that particular photo from what I can tell of it right here on my computer, because my Facebook seems to have almost completely crashed with the load of viewers that it's receiving right now. But there's a big, like a potentiometer, a big variable resistor on the other side that has like a throttle handle on it, and that controls the amount of voltage that goes to each of the sections that are receiving the go-ahead to become part of the circuit and to receive some of the energy that's coming from the central core of the vehicle. Now, what I believe is that, based on everything that I've seen about this technology and about the way that it accomplishes what it does in the way of steering, is that even though this might appear to be a craft that's entirely based on the Biefeld-Brown effect, where you're using positive and negative charges on parallel plate capacitors to make it fly, what you are doing, in fact, is the system itself is creating a warp in the fabric of space-time. It's creating a vector in space-time by virtue of the sheer value, the sheer magnitude of the amount of voltage that's being stored on this capacitor section. We're talking about millions of volts of electricity as potential being stored in the capacitor. But then, by varying the amount of voltage that goes out to the different sections in this circular array, you can actually reshape the field and create more of a repulsive effect on one side or the other, so you can steer it pretty much like, for the pilots out there, like the swash plate on the main rotor of a helicopter, where if you want it to bank to the left, you put a little more lift on the blades as they're coming around on the right side of the helicopter. As the blades are turning, each one in sequence will deflect a little bit more to create more lift on the right side of the aircraft, and it'll bank and turn to the left. It's the same kind of thing that you would do with the capacitor sections of the ARV, but I don't think that the capacitor section itself is entirely responsible for the lift and the propulsion of the vehicle, but I do believe it's responsible for shaping the field around it in a way that allows you to steer the vehicle.
Now, everyone go and look at the color cutaway that has been posted of the ARV. And if you look on the second floor in the dome, you'll see the two chairs, the two crew chairs. The chair on the right, you can see the inverted candy cane. I like the way you put that, Mark. And the metallic ball right there that is in these illustrations. That's where it's placed in the ship. And if you notice, you don't have control panels or anything like that. Everything is done with that ball. Now, what he is referring to, and Mark, you can jump in at any time and call me a doofus and stop me. But what he is referring to, that ball is directly connected to those plates that you see on the very bottom of the craft, and that's where that's the capacitors that he's talking about that hold the charge and the voltage. So,
it's not. In truth, though, it's not correct or connected directly to those capacitor sections. What it does is it's the interface between those sections that are receiving a tremendous amount of electricity and the switching mechanism that turns them on and off and allows them to store more or less energy in each individual packet.
And so, and I'm trying to simplify this. So as your fingers or your hands are on this metallic ball on the second floor, that is what is charging or controlling the electricity below the craft, and therefore changing directions and going in the direction that you would want, up, down, or a 360-degree version of your flight path, because that is an actual ball that's in your hand, and that's controlling the voltage through the touch of your fingers below the craft. And now, am I explaining that correctly? So it's a tactile way of flying. You're not, you don't have ailerons and lifters and wind and so forth. That's not what is controlling this. It is technically, it's your mind going through your fingers on this ball And that is what is creating the direction that you want to go in and the speed.
That's true. That's right. And one of the things that I want to explain about what appear to be three different views of this sort of flight control device is that what you're seeing there is the unoccupied version, or the condition that you would see in the vehicle when the vehicle is unmanned and it's hovering. It has an automatic correcting capability where there's just enough of an influence of local gravity when this thing is stationary and hovering at low energy above the ground. And if it starts to, say, drift off to the left, the little bowl that's hanging from that the sphere will begin to tilt in the same direction. And when it does, it creates just enough repulsive force on the one side that the thing is self-correcting. It'll stabilize and go back to a level hover. But when you want to fly this thing, when you actually want to control where it's going, sitting there in the seat with your left hand upside down and swiveling around, it really limits your dexterity and your ability to control exactly where you're going. And so it seemed reasonable to me, and after a lot of consideration from the design standpoint, it seemed to me that the only way that this could really be worked effectively as a control while the pilot is in the ejection seat is if this thing tilts downward and allows him to put his hand on the lower part of that control mechanism, almost like the tracking ball in one of the early video games like Missile Command or something, right?
Right.
Now you said that there were no panels or instrumentation or any kind of dials or anything. But what I understand is if you look at the outside of that drawing, you can see these little blisters that look like they have a camera in each one. That was something, it was called part of the synthetic vision system, because when this thing is in the atmosphere, it creates so much tremendous ionization around the vehicle because of the extremely high voltages that are employed. You actually produce something called X-ray photons, which are literally lethal. And so the whole outside of the vehicle is kind of covered with this lead. It looks like powdered lead flakes of lead in a sort of a resin-based paint that has been painted over the entire outside of the vehicle to protect the pilots from the radiation. But they need some way to see. And so you've seen the more recent development of this 3D virtual reality system called the Oculus, kind of like a face plate that you wear, like a set of, the old folks' dark glasses that wrap around and everything with a strap.
Right.
Well, imagine that this same kind of technology was already being in use back in the 1960s, except that it was a large appendage that actually attached to the helmet of the pilot. In some ways, it actually was a spin-off or probably part of the development process for the early gun-slaving systems that were used on the Cobra helicopters that they had over in Vietnam, where the pilot had a reticle sight that projected a laser on his eyeball, would see where his eyeball was looking, and there was a kind of a rod that would come out, and it would attach to the back of his helmet, and it could tell where the pilot's head was turned, how far forward or how far back he was leaning, left to right, and so forth. And it would plug all these parameters into the drive system for the gun that was under the front of the helicopter, so the pilot could literally look at the target off to one side as he's flying around and just pull the trigger, and the thing would shoot wherever he looked. And so if you employ those same kinds of principles to the flight control system of a vehicle like the alien reproduction vehicle, you can see how by utilizing these same kinds of things in a virtual reality set, you're slaving the cameras rather than slaving a gun. But you slew the cameras in pairs so that you have a left eye and a right eye view that permits complete three-dimensional viewing of the external environment without exposing the pilot to the ionization radiation and the X-ray photons and things like that.
Pretty incredible. And when you look at some of the photographs of different saucers that have been published, they all, not all, I made a mistake there. A lot of them have these bubble type appendages on the top of the craft, which apparently is not a coincidence here. This was what was out there flying. And so when you see those vintage photographs and you look at those, you're not thinking alien. Are you thinking our Air Force?
Well, I tell you, I certainly do. In fact, the funny thing about it was the original witness, Brad, had said that a lot of the components that were used in this vehicle were literally off-the-shelf components that at the time that he saw it, that the CCD cameras that were used in the synthetic vision system looked just like the ones that are used in the surveillance and security camera systems that are in Las Vegas, that all have that same kind of acrylic bubble over the outside of them.
Right.
But now, if you look back at the photographs that were taken near Provo, Utah in 1966, the blisters that are on the outside of that are much larger. And so if you think back to what video camera technology looked like back in the 1960s, where the cameras were much larger,
right,
it makes perfect sense because you need a larger blister to accommodate a larger camera system.
That's right. And now these panels, we're going to head towards a break. And when we come back, oh, by the way, Mark, I want to cover something that you and I have never covered before. I want to do the Cedarville sighting when we come back.
Oh, okay.
And those illustrations, and we've never discussed it before, and I do want to get to the bottom of that. So before we do that, I kind of want to finish up here on the ARV. The cutaway, the color cutaway, everybody. Do you see this opening on the bottom? That's not, well, it's a cutaway, but these those are panels that are removable, that go around the craft. And Brad said something interesting about this. He said that the craft was used, right? That he could almost see handprints and thumbprints and stuff on the outside of the craft.
Chips in the resin-based paint around the Zeus fasteners that held these panels in place. They were in fact, the entire aircraft is constructed out of resins and plastics. So in essence, it's transparent to electromagnetic radiation. The electromagnetic field that operates in this thing is very powerful. I've been told recently that you really couldn't have anything metal or any kind of electronic gadgets near this thing when it was operating on the ground or begin to power up, because it would influence all these things. But the two panels that you see there on the sort of off-center to the right, directly out from what looks like a robotic gripping arm, actually had a number of electronic devices that would cause they might have been pneumatic for all I know, that would cause those two particular panels to swing outward, so that you could extend this robotic arm out and grab samples from the local environment. And the interesting thing, too, is that in the very beginning of my freelance career after I left General Dynamics, I did a cutaway illustration for a company down in, I think it was San Clemente. It was called International Robotmation Intelligence. And they had a robotic arm that looked just like that. And it was driven by pressurized air. And the air would run through a high-speed little tiny turbine, and it would drive a little tiny gear that was connected by a small chain, to a larger gear, which in turn was connected to a small gear, and through using a high-speed turbine to drive a series of gears, they could go from high-speed, low torque to low-speed, high torque through this gear drive system. And that was how the entire robotic arm worked, and it had tremendous power, even though it was using air pressure and these little tiny turbines to drive it. It was fascinating.
Absolutely mind-blowing. Now, what do you think? We've got let me look here. We've got about 90 seconds. I've asked you this before. The tanks that are shown here that Brad had seen, what do you think these were used for? It's not propulsion. Is it a cooling system? No. Is it oxygen to breathe? What is it?
Yeah, those were oxygen tanks. And even all the tanks themselves were made of what they call protruded containment vessels. Basically, they take an inflatable mandrel or shape, and they spin a composite or like a carbon Kevlar thread over it while it's impregnated with a resin, and then they allow it to harden. And it's actually physically stronger than if it was made out of a steel vessel, but the whole thing is composite so that it doesn't have any effect on the electrostatic or the electromagnetic fields of the ARV.
And the other thing that I find interesting before we hit the break, no beds. Right? No sleeping quarters. It just travels too fast, right? It goes to where it needs to go, and you get back fast. And
I would imagine so. But the interesting thing, too, is that this system had an ejection system in it where the top and the bottom halves of the sphere would blow apart. They basically have like a flange at the top of the bottom. You can kind of see it over there to the right.
Right.
In the one where I'm pointing at the thing behind me, just a little bit to the right of that device I'm using to point with, you can see the edge, the sort of cutaway edge of the flange that secures that set of coils around the crew compartment. And then there was a flange above and below that connected to the two halves of the crew compartment sphere. And when they had to do an ejection, the entire top of the sphere would come right off, and it would pull the outer sheath of that central column with it, including the ejection seats, and then it could actually function as kind of a rudimentary re-entry shield. And then once it got below a certain altitude, the ejection seats would all shoot down off of that central column on a set of rails, and the parachutes would deploy something below 14,000 feet.
There you go. Let's take a break right here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Cedarville sighting. It's pretty interesting, but I've never talked or discussed this with Mark before. So we'll do that for the first time on Fade to Black. Also, I'm going to give Mark a second to think about this. If they are traveling at those kinds of speeds, were the pilots time traveling, and were they younger or older when they got back to Earth? This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with Mark McCandlish right after this short break. Stay with us.
Hey, what up, y'all? It's your girl Vivica Fox here, and you are listening to my boy, Jimmy Church, on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter.
But listening to Jimmy Church will.
Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies.
I had gout in both my knees, and it's gone.
Well, I'm pretty stupid. I should have ordered it 15 years ago. Best thing I ever got in my... It's the most effective product that I've ever bought in my life.
He had eczema on his hand, and it cracked for years. He did anything from doctor, every cream, everything. And 3 months on the veggies and fruit, it was gone.
They're just awesome. They keep asking me, what am I doing? I told them what I did with my cholesterol. I had the blood test, right? And it went down 100 points. 262, now it's 162. Everything is just perfect.
Call now to find out how to get your free month's supply of Balance of Nature. Call 800-2468-751. That's 800-2468-751. Call now, 800-2468-751. Or go online to balanceofnature.com.
Use promo code TSL.
Would odors, mold, and mildew describe your basement or crawl space? It doesn't have to be that way. Transform them into a fresh, healthy, usable one with the technologically advanced Wave Moisture Control Units. The computerized operation maximizes moisture control and also expels harmful radon, combustion gases, and numerous other pollutants. Dehumidifiers are old technology that do nothing for air quality and waste energy. Wave units are intelligent, self-monitoring, do not need maintenance, and will save you hundreds in electricity. Wave units are still running effectively over 15 years. They've been tested and installed in public and military housing and by property managers nationwide. Buy a unit now, and if your home is not fresher and drier, you can return it for a full refund for up to 12 months. What have you got to lose? Call now. 1-888-618-WAVE. 1-888-618-WAVE. Or visit mydryhome.com. That's mydryhome.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
What's up, Fadernauts? Studio Dome loves Fade to Black and the F2B audience so much that they have put together the ultimate stereo Bluetooth system. They've done it just for you. Man, check this out. The Studio Dome SBB2 stereo system is here. It's featuring 2 Studio Boombox 2 SBB2 wireless Bluetooth speakers, packed in its own custom hard shell case. This Studio Dome system features the very latest in stereo Bluetooth technology. The 2 full-range boomboxes are in true wireless stereo. You've got to hear this. It's amazing. It's just $129, and use the promo code JCRTWS, and you'll also get free shipping. It's simple. Just go to JimmyChurchRadio.com, click on the Studio Dome banner. Go Beckley Tepe.
Brittany, Gabby, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
not a lifestyle we chose. We were born this way. KGRAradio.com.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Welcome back, Fade to Black. Man, I haven't had this much fun on a show since, well, last night. But this is what Fade to Black is all about. I know you hate me right now, but that's it. I'm sitting here talking to Mark McCandlish. Now, Mark, and I've been doing this a lot lately, and Rita and I spent many hours last night researching and going over special relativity, space-time, the effects of time and how time is relative to one person and another one that is in motion and so forth, and going through all of that. Well, when we look at all of these applications, and I'm not a physicist by any stretch, but all of these apply to the ARV. And if you are a pilot in the ARV and you're dashing around at 9,000 plus, right, or heading out into space and returning, certainly the effects of time are there. Are they time traveling in this thing?
Yes. Yeah. Essentially, you've actually created a time travel device as well. And in fact, if you've ever spoken to Andrew Brishago,
yep,
or Bill Whitecrow, who's a friend of mine. Actually, I know both of these gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was probably about the time that they were able to successfully back engineer whatever it was that they recovered in Roswell and other places around the southwestern United States in the late 1940s, early 1950s, that they began to realize that there were some other things happening besides just modifying space itself, and the mass of the objects in or around these vehicles, but that you could actually modify the pace of time too. There was a scientist, a friend of mine by the name of Fred Bell.
From San Diego? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he actually lived in Laguna Beach, from what I understand.
Right.
And he had built a device that looked an awful lot like the device that Cavor had built in the Jules Verne story, First Men in the Moon. It was kind of a sphere that had a number of plates, and these plates were all triangular in shape, kind of like a miniature geodesic sphere.
Right.
But these individual triangular plates were actually parallel plate capacitors, very much like what you see in the bottom of the ARV. And once he'd spent about, $150,000 from what he told me on building this thing in his backyard in Laguna Beach, which lined up right against the back end of his backyard, lined up next to Pacific Coast Highway. And he turned this thing on late at night one time, and he looked out the window. I think Sean David Morton was actually there when this occurred, but he looked out the window and he saw that the vehicles that had been passing his home at 55 to 65 miles an hour on Pacific Coast Highway had slowed down literally to the pace of a snail, and that the alternator pulses going through the electrical system of the cars could actually be perceived as flashing and dimming very slowly of the headlights. And that's something that occurs like maybe 30 times a second. You'd never really see it when you're looking at a car, but his device that he built allowed him to slow down the time, the relative time outside of the environment that he was in so much that it actually changed the pace of time within the local space-time that he had created there. And he realized when he began seeing what was happening that he was actually experiencing time at a much accelerated pace, and that if for some reason he wound up getting stuck or could not turn the system off or could not get out of it, that he might starve to death before anybody realized that he was trapped inside.
Right. And you know what? The Fred Bell story, for the audience that is not familiar with it, which is okay, go check it out, because Fred Bell was taken out by the CIA. And that's...
I wondered about that.
Yeah, man. There's a very, very, very strange story around the, it involves Jesse Ventura, too, as well, and it's we don't have time to go into that now, but the Fred Bell story is an incredible one. Okay, let's get to, before we run out of time, I got to know about this Cedarville sighting. And before we jump into it, I'm going to start at the back end of the story and do that. That's what I do here. For some reason, I do things backwards. The Polaroid, where is it?
It's in the possession of a friend of mine. It was taken by her husband in 1982 near Cedarville, California. It's up in the northwestern corner at the extreme north end of the state. It's kind of a high desert plateau kind of area out there. But it also happens to be an area where the U.S. military does an awful lot of flight testing of some of these classified systems because it's kind of a generally remote environment. There are not a lot of homes or towns up in that area. And it borders, Cedarville borders an area referred to as the Surprise Valley, which is well known among a lot of the test pilots as one of the areas, at least outside of the Nellis test range, where some of these things are flown and have been seen on many occasions. There's a number of people that I know that live up in that area that I've had occasion to talk to that have seen some pretty amazing feats of flight in that area. It's commonly seen by UFOs, but this particular instance, the instance that occurred in 1982, was in broad daylight.
Do I have your permission to publish this right now in Twitter? Your sketch?
I don't personally. I wasn't prepared for a request, but I could certainly find out later this evening or tomorrow, so that it could be posted on your website.
Okay.
But I do think I can do a pretty good job of describing what this thing looked like. Imagine this. In some ways, reminds me of the big the flying wing or giant V-shaped craft that we're seeing in the Hudson Valley UFO sightings from the 1970s and 1980s. These immense craft that were all black, in some cases seemed to be partially transparent, or had some kind of physical structure with a lot of different lights and things on them. This particular vehicle had an exterior that had a lot of the same kind of faceted shapes and contours that we later saw in the late 1980s on the F-117A stealth fighter. It was one of the techniques that Lockheed had developed using radar-absorbent materials and the shaping of aircraft to defeat the ability of an enemy radar to be able to lock on or to track the aircraft. Now, the interesting thing about this particular vehicle was that it appears to have a large sphere embedded at the apex of this sort of V-shaped fuselage or wing shape. But it also seems to have a sphere that's embedded at the midpoint of each of the two legs or wings, if you want to call them that, about midway down the length of the wing. Now,
well, let me ask you this really quick. The drawing that you have here, is this the view that is in the photograph, in the Polaroid?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
yes, it is.
So
and it's very tiny in the Polaroid. You need a photographer's loop just to be able to see it with any degree of clarity at all.
Well, let me help.
But I've actually held the original Polaroid in my hands. I can tell you that it's not trick photography. That this is original photograph that was taken with your typical Polaroid land camera in 1982.
Well, let me just say this really quick, and then I'll let you finish. To the audience, it looks like an origami folding geodesic craft, like it was like it could fold that's what it looks. Mark, it looks like it could fold. It's absolutely
it's interesting
insane.
You bring that up, Jimmy, because one of the things that I looked at was the accounts of just how big this thing was, and the assertion was that the individual side of this thing was something close to 600 feet in length. The thing was immense.
Right.
In fact, in order to accommodate this thing and to hide it or put it inside, your standard large aircraft hangar, anything that the U.S. Air Force has at Area 51 or any of their other bases, you would really have to fold this thing up in order to put it inside one of those hangars. And it did appear as though there was a circular hinge point around the spheres that were mounted midway down the length of each of those legs or wings, whichever they happen to be. But the interesting thing about the sighting was, and there were probably 30 people present when this thing was having some sort of flight control problem. It was pointed nose down at about a 25-degree angle to the ground. It was banked slightly to its left side, so you can see the upper surfaces of this in the photograph. And it stayed there for the better part of a half an hour. That's why there were so many eyewitnesses, because it was less than a quarter of a mile away from the highway that went up past and somewhat north of Cedarville itself. But when this thing the pilots finally figured out how to manipulate it in a way that will allow them to get away from public view, they found a way to roll the airframe, continuing in a left bank roll while flipping end over end. So the nose comes up as it begins to continue a roll to the left. So basically it does like an end over end somersault while making a half a twist. So it winds up pointing up and away from the people on the ground. It immediately began to ascend. When it got up to about 5,000 feet off the ground, it shot away at a blinding pace and disappeared out into space.
This is one of the more incredible sightings, and I've listened to a lot of witnesses. I've seen strange things, and so have you. This is unique. This is a singular type of aircraft that I haven't heard of this before. I haven't seen anything like this. And for you, I'm sure those are the exact thoughts that went through your mind. I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen anything described like this. And this is a very unique craft and experience.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, the faceting of the surface suggested very strongly to me that it had to have been a product of a Department of Defense type of program, particularly since those kind of features suggest that this is a vehicle that is attempting to elude detection by radar. You can see where if you had a platform that can move with the kind of speed that this thing obviously was capable of, based on the sightings,
right?
That it could get into and out of an environment very quickly. But the key point was not to be detected on radar until the very last minute when someone had a visual lock on the presence of this vehicle. And being that it was all black, if you show up at nighttime, there's a good chance somebody's not going to see you right away.
Also,
so yes, I think that this was a product of a military design competition. There may have been other variants, other things like it, but I have a hunch. It's my personal belief that this vehicle was probably one of the first vehicles that was being used in what later became known as Solar Warden, which is sort of a part of the secret space program. But that's my own personal opinion. I don't have any disclosures from secret witnesses or something that told me that, but that's my gut feeling about it.
Also, there's no lifting body. There's nothing aerodynamic about this. It's not flying in the atmosphere, using the atmosphere or wind or anything like that, or air.
No,
it's
kind of reminds one of a Klingon bird of prey.
Right. There you go. And also what I see here, I wish I could hold the photograph or see the original. It looks like you've got three type of gravity or anti-gravity units here, 3 points, right, to stabilize it and take it where it needs to go. Do you think that because they don't look like windows, I think those are for propulsion. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the other witnesses that I encountered back around 2000 was a young man who had participated in a crash recovery inside East Germany right before the Berlin Wall came down in May of 1989. It's about 4 months before the Soviet Union collapsed and the East German government collapsed along with it, along with most of the communist-style governments that they had in that part of the world. But this aircraft had obviously been a part of some kind of stealth intelligence gathering mission. It was inside East Germany near the town of Halle when it crashed, and the fellow that I was speaking to was aboard a military helicopter that had stealth capability that was flying a nap of the Earth mission inside East Germany, and they had gone in there specifically to recover double agents, people who were working within the East German government that they were concerned might be harmed or killed if push came to shove and the government collapsed a lot of times anyone who's a suspected traitor, of course, is just taken out and shot right away. And so they were going into East Germany with the specific intent of recovering these double agents when they were diverted to the crash site to participate in the recovery of the debris. Now, this craft that crashed had a triangular shape. Imagine a black arrowhead flying backwards through the air. And at the very pointy end of this thing was a small, say about 2.5-foot diameter sphere suspended or embedded into the underside of the body, and then one in the front on each corner. So there was a total of 3 spheres, the same basic configuration. The cockpit was in kind of a pyramid-shaped contour that was higher in the front, set back from the very front of the vehicle, maybe only as far as 6 feet, but the entire cockpit and the canopy that came up off it looked pretty much like what you would expect to see on the F-117A stealth fighter, complete with the jagged edges along the brake line between the canopy and the rest of the fuselage of the aircraft. Now, when this pilot crashed, apparently it was a problem with his night vision system, and he clipped at the top of a pine tree and sheared it off with the left front corner of the vehicle as he was coming up out of a valley and going over a slight rise. And what that did is it immediately crushed the sphere that was in the left front corner. Looked like a ceramic sphere, kind of shaped like a pumpkin with the vertical striations, but then each one of those vertical striations had little scalloping contours, kind of like the terracotta tiles they put on a missionary style architecture in Southern California, that kind of thing.
Right.
But all white, all white ceramic. When the pilot tried to correct and prevent from crashing into the hillside, he basically went into a very high angle of attack. The tail end of the craft hit first, and when it did, it split the fuselage in half right where that third sphere is, back at the very narrow, thin, pointy end of the vehicle. And it freed up one of the 3 spheres and actually prevented it from being damaged because it immediately began to hover above the landscape and was floating around when this crew member of the helicopter and other participants in the recovery arrived. Now, they were tasked with the assignment of recovering this sphere. They had Navy SEALs around the perimeter with the under and over shotgun, M16, grenade launcher kind of weapons. They had Cobra helicopters orbiting the site to provide any protection against anyone that showed up. They had acquired vehicles from the local economy to carry away some of the most valuable components to this vehicle. They already had a couple of lab technicians there, literally in white lab coats, that were pulling the avionics out of the vehicle. But where the vehicle had cracked open, you could see that the structure was an entirely composite structure, and it had what looked like a gold wire mesh embedded in the composite material. And maybe this was sort of like a Faraday cage to protect the avionics on the inside of the craft from the electromagnetic propulsion system, whatever it was. But most interesting of all was the recovery of this sphere. They were given one of those yellow military utility cases that they put equipment in. If you've ever been in the military, you probably refer to, they have kind of a piano hinge along one side with many little pins that go into these little loops. And then on the other side is a series of turnbuckles on the handle to carry the thing around. So they tried to put this thing in the box. They came up with it with its piano hinge vertical, almost like a clamshell, to try and close it around this vehicle and the sphere. And the sphere was actually repelled by the aluminum of the case. And so what they did was they slid the piano hinge off, they took the lid off, and they slid it up underneath this thing, which caused it to levitate a little bit more. And then they put the body of the cabinet down over the top, engaged the piano hinge, turned the clasp to close it, and as soon as they let go of this thing, it stood up like a gravestone all by itself because this thing was bouncing around inside off the reflected electromagnetic fields. But before they were able to capture it, it was doing some very strange things. It had a circular aperture at the top, looked like some kind of a sealed carry-through with a number of wires that came out, and the sphere was sort of bobbing along, hovering above the landscape, and then it would stop in position and it would begin to spin around its vertical axis like a top. And as it spun faster and faster, there would be an electrical charge that was being generated, and it would come out and it would begin to arc across the broken wires that were sticking out of the top of this thing. And once that happened, it seemed to neutralize this activity, and the thing would return to sort of this bobbing hover around the landscape.
Unbelievable. I remember hearing about that. Didn't they have to dig the craft out? They brought in more military, and they had a whole excavation project there to get this thing out of the dirt.
Well, this is the interesting part. You're going to love this. They took that sphere and they put it at the end of a composite lanyard, and it was hoisted out of there by a CH-53 Super Stallion.
Right.
It was all in camouflage, everything flying below
right.
the earth. And because they didn't want this little ball to be anywhere near the avionics of this other helicopter.
Right.
But then after physically taking out all the avionics and manually taking them down the hill to this road where they had a couple of these Mercedes-Benz sort of like flex vans to carry away some of the valuable components that they didn't want to transport by air, they put a couple of thermite grenades inside this thing and burned it to nothing. It basically, because it was an all-carbon, like a composite material, it basically burned in place. There may even still be residue there today. It was the crash site was about 10 kilometers southwest of Halle, the city of Halle, in what was then East Germany, on a hillside that was facing to the southwest.
Right. It's an incredible story. I haven't heard it in quite a while, and it's all coming back to me now. And how there were literally, Mark, help me out here, but there was a couple of hundred of soldiers that were involved in getting this craft out of there, and they had to do it without being detected. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that some of the Navy SEALs probably came in by helicopter, just like the crew member that reported this story to me. But what's even more fascinating is that after I reported this story in one of the first interviews that I did several years ago, I got a number of emails from other people who had seen versions of that same vehicle type that were even larger, that were maybe 50, 60, 70 feet in length, just the same technology, but scaled up to a larger application. So this was obviously some kind of technology that I imagine would fall somewhere between your stereotypical flying saucer and anti-gravity propulsion, and something that was more maybe, shall we say, electromagnetic in nature.
Right.
But I've often wondered what was going on inside those spheres. I looked at the contouring like a pumpkin, vertical striations, but then with all these little scalloped, sort of cup-shaped contours in this white ceramic sphere, and it reminds me of the turbulence patterns. If there's a fluid of some kind in there that's spinning around and generating some kind of a field, it really kind of reminds me of the work done in the 1930s and 1940s by Victor Schauberger in Germany.
Right.
I mean, it may well be an offshoot of some of the research that he did back at that time.
Mark, I want to thank you right now. What an incredible 600th show, and having you on this special night. It's just been such a treat for me, and I could just sit and listen to you forever, and so could this audience. And I can't wait to get you back on the show. There's so much more that we didn't get a chance to explore tonight, and we'll get you back ASAP and do it once again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate it. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to more of the phone calls. I would have enjoyed that, too. And I will check on the Cedarville photograph and see if we can get that up there for you, too.
Yeah, when I'm having a good time with a guest, I don't pick up the phones. I just don't do it. I don't. They know that now. They know if the conversation is going good, that's just the way that it is. I don't want to be interrupted. Thank you so much, Mark. And be safe out there, and keep looking to the sky. All right?
Good night.
You got it. Mark McCandlish. His links for markmccandlish.com are over at jimmychurchradio.com. And before I get out of here, I want to say happy birthday to the one and only skater, Lisa. Lisa, happy birthday. And Tanette, happy birthday to as well. And that will conclude this episode, the 600th of Fade to Black, with our guest, Mark McCandlish. Thank you so much, Mark. Absolutely fascinating conversation tonight. I didn't want it to end, and you could tell, too. Fade to Black's executive producers, Rita Kamarian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Paul, Mark T. Kovar, LJ3, Renee, Jonas. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Faded by Dale. Webmaster is Drew, the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA, The Planet. Thank you, Mark McCandlish, the one and only. Tomorrow night, right here, Whitley Strieber. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2016 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Go check out Mark McCandlish, markmccandlish.com. Everybody be safe. Go Beckley Tepe.